The moment Ethan Brooks stepped onto that polished marble floor, he had exactly 3 seconds to decide: protect his job or protect a child no one else would defend. What happened next didn't just stop the music. It shattered every assumption in that glittering ballroom. A single father with empty pockets. A billionaire's daughter with a scar the world couldn't forgive. And one choice that would expose the ugliest truth about power, privilege, and what it really means to be human. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. The Grandview Hotel had never looked more beautiful, and Ethan Brooks had never felt more invisible. Golden light poured through crystal chandeliers, each one worth more than his annual salary. The kind of light that didn't just illuminate, it judged. It caught the diamond necklaces and platinum cufflinks, the hand-stitched gowns, and Italian leather shoes. It made everything gleam except the people who served it. Ethan moved through the crowd like a shadow, his white serving jacket pressed crisp despite being worn thin at the elbows. His hands, calloused from double shifts and single fatherhood, balanced a tray of champagne flutes with practiced precision. Around him, the city's elite celebrated the Harrington Foundation's annual charity gala, where the cost of a single table could feed a family for a year. The irony wasn't lost on him. "Excuse me," a woman in a red dress snapped her fingers at him without looking up from her phone. "These glasses have fingerprints. Bring new ones." Ethan glanced at the pristine crystal in her hand. There were no fingerprints, but he nodded anyway, because that's what you did when you couldn't afford to lose your job. When you had a 6-year-old daughter waiting at home with a babysitter, you were already paying too much. When the collection notices were stacking up and the car was making that sound again. "Right away, ma'am." He disappeared into the kitchen's controlled chaos, where the real world lived, where Miguel cursed over seared scallops and Sarah's mascara ran from the steam and nobody pretended anything was beautiful. "You okay, Ethan?" Sarah wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. "Table 12 again?" "Always table 12. He set down the tray and reached for fresh glasses, catching his reflection in the stainless steel prep station. 34 years old, but the mirror showed someone older. Grief did that. Loss carved years into your face that time alone couldn't touch. 3 years since cancer took Miranda. 3 years of waking up to an empty bed and her coffee mug still in the cabinet and their daughter asking when mommy was coming home. 3 years of learning that some questions don't have good answers. "Earth to Ethan," Miguel's voice cut through. "You're doing it again, man." "Doing what?" "That thing where you go somewhere else." Miguel pointed his tongs at him. "Look, I know tonight sucks. I know these people treat us like furniture, but you need this job, so smile, nod, and remember, it's just one night." Ethan wanted to argue, but Miguel was right. This gala paid triple overtime. Triple overtime meant catching up on the electric bill. Maybe new shoes for Sophie before school started. Maybe, if he was lucky, 1 month where he didn't have to choose between groceries and rent. So he smiled. He nodded. He lifted the tray of perfect, fingerprint-free glasses and pushed back through the swinging doors into the world of people who'd never had to make that choice. The orchestra was playing something classical and expensive. Vivaldi, maybe. Or Mozart. Miranda would have known. She'd been the one who loved music, who danced in the kitchen while cooking dinner, who'd taught Sophie to twirl before she could properly walk. The memory hit him sideways, as they always did, sudden and sharp and stealing his breath. He steadied himself against a marble column, the tray balanced on one hand, and forced his lungs to remember their job. In, out, out! The grief counselor had said it would get easier. 3 years later, Ethan was still waiting for that particular lie to come true. When his vision cleared, he saw her. The girl sat alone at table 7, nearly hidden behind an elaborate centerpiece of white orchids and twisted gold wire. While everyone else clustered in groups, laughing too loud and drinking too fast, she remained perfectly still. Isolated. Like she'd built an invisible wall between herself and the glittering crowd. She couldn't have been more than 9 or 10. Dark hair pulled back in an elaborate braid that someone had clearly spent time on. A dress that probably cost more than Ethan's car, midnight blue with delicate beading that caught the light. She should have looked like a princess. Instead, she looked like she wanted to disappear. Ethan moved closer, weaving between tables, and that's when he saw why. A scar ran down the left side of her face, from her temple to her jaw. Not fresh, healed, but permanent. The kind of mark that told a story of survival, of pain endured and overcome. The kind of mark that should have spoken of strength. But the world didn't see strength. The world saw difference. And the world was cruel to anything different. Absolutely tragic, a woman's voice drifted from table 8. Richard should have kept her home. This is a social event, not a charity case? Her companion laughed. Oh, the irony. They weren't even trying to be quiet. Ethan's hands tightened on the tray. He wanted to turn around, to say something, to defend a child who couldn't defend herself. But Miguel's words echoed. You need this job. He kept walking. The girl, Lena, he'd heard someone call her, didn't seem to notice the whispers, or maybe she'd just learned to pretend she didn't. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the untouched plate of food in front of her. Her father, Richard Harrington, presided over the head table 20 feet away, surrounded by investors and politicians, and people who wanted something from him. The most powerful man in the room, and he looked utterly helpless. Ethan had seen that expression before. In the mirror, every time Sophie came home from kindergarten asking why she didn't have a mommy, like the other kids. When you'd give anything, everything, to fix something, but money and power and desperation weren't enough. Some wounds you couldn't buy your way out of. Hey, buddy? A hand grabbed Ethan's elbow, hard. He turned to find a red-faced man in a tuxedo, already drunk despite it being barely 8 o'clock. We need more champagne at table 14. Move it. Of course, sir. Ethan started toward the bar, but the man's voice carried after him, intentionally loud. And someone should really tell Harrington that this isn't bring your freak to work day. Some of us paid good money for this event. Laughter erupted around him. Not everyone. Some people had the decency to look uncomfortable. But enough. Enough that the message was clear. Ethan stopped walking. In his mind, he saw Sophie's face, heard her small voice reading from the picture book they'd gone through last night. The one about kindness and courage and standing up for what's right. She'd looked at him with those serious eyes, Miranda's eyes, and said, Daddy, heroes help people who can't help themselves. That's what makes them heroes. Yeah, baby, he'd said, kissing her forehead. That's exactly what makes them heroes. Miguel's warning whispered on one shoulder, Sophie's wisdom on the other. The champagne glasses trembled on his tray. Across the room, Lena's shoulders drew inward, making herself smaller, trying to take up less space in a world that had already decided she took up too much. Ethan knew that posture, had worn it himself in the months after Miranda died, when grief made him feel like an open wound walking through a world that didn't want to see pain. When people offered useless platitudes or worse, avoided him entirely because loss was contagious, and they were afraid to catch it. The orchestra shifted into a waltz, an upbeat, cheerful melody that felt like mockery. Couples moved onto the dance floor, men in tuxedos, women in gowns, all of them beautiful and unblemished and safe in their certainty that they deserved to be there. No one approached table 7. Richard Harrington stood from the head table, clearly intending to go to his daughter. But a hand on his arm stopped him. One of the board members, already launching into what looked like an urgent conversation. Richard's jaw tightened. He glanced toward Lena, conflict written across his face. Business or daughter, power or love. He sat back down. That's when Ethan's decision crystallized. Not a thought exactly, more like a recognition. The kind of moment where you see the fork in the road and understand that whatever choice you make will define something essential about who you are. He could keep his head down, serve the champagne, collect his paycheck, go home to Sophie and pretend he hadn't seen anything. Or he could remember what it felt like to be Miranda, dying in a hospital bed, making him promise to teach their daughter that kindness mattered more than comfort, that courage meant acting even when you were afraid. Ethan set the tray down on an empty table. His supervisor, Margaret, materialized instantly. Brooks, what are you doing? Table 14? Can wait. His voice came out steadier than he felt. I need a minute. You need a... Margaret's eyes widened. You need this job is what you need. Pick up that tray right now. But Ethan was already moving, not toward the bar or the kitchen or any place he was supposed to be. He walked toward table 7, toward the girl who'd been made invisible by people who should have known better. The conversations around him didn't stop, not at first. He was just a waiter. part of the scenery. Until he stopped in front of Lena's table and did something that no one expected. He bowed. Not a casual nod. A real bow, the kind you'd offer someone you respected. Someone who mattered. Lena's head snapped up, confusion and suspicion warring across her face. Up close, the scar was more pronounced, but so were her eyes, dark and intelligent and carrying far too much pain for someone her age. "Excuse me, miss," Ethan said quietly, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I know this might seem strange, but I was wondering if you'd do me the honor of dancing with me." The room didn't stop immediately. Conversations continued, glasses clinked, the orchestra played on. But in the small space around table 7, everything went silent. Lena stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. "What?" "A dance." He gestured toward the floor, where couples twirled in practiced elegance. "If you'd like to, of course. No pressure." She glanced toward her father, then back at Ethan. "Why?" It was the right question, the smart question. In her shoes, with her history, he'd ask the same thing. Why would anyone choose to single her out, to draw more attention to the face everyone else was trying to ignore? Ethan could have given a dozen answers, could have said something about kindness or courage or doing the right thing. Instead, he went with the truth. "Because you look like you could use a friend," he said simply, "and because everyone deserves to dance if they want to." Something flickered behind her eyes. Hope, maybe. Or the memory of hope, dusty and almost forgotten. Her hand moved slightly, like it might reach for his. Then a voice cut through the fragile moment like a blade. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Ethan turned to find the drunk man from earlier, the one who'd made the cruel joke, standing 3 feet away with his chest puffed out and his face flushed with champagne courage. "I'm asking the young lady to dance," Ethan said evenly. "The young lady." The man laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Is that what we're calling it? Listen, waiter, and I mean that in the most pathetic sense of the word, you need to get back to your job and stop bothering Harrington's unfortunate daughter." Heat flooded Ethan's face. Not embarrassment, rage, pure crystalline rage that made his vision sharpen and his muscles tense. But before he could respond, another voice joined the fray. "He's not bothering me." Lena stood up, her chair scraping against marble. She was small, barely came up to Ethan's chest, but she lifted her chin with a defiance that made her seem taller. "He asked me to dance. I'm considering it." The drunk man's mouth opened and closed. Around them, more people were noticing now, turning to watch. Conversations dying mid-sentence. Margaret appeared at Ethan's elbow, her voice a panicked hiss. "Brooks, I'm begging you, don't do this. Mr. Harrington will have you fired." "No, he won't." The voice carried across the ballroom with the kind of authority that money could buy. Richard Harrington stood at the head table, his napkin falling forgotten to the floor. He wasn't a large man, but power radiated from him like heat. When he spoke, people listened. "He won't fire anyone," Richard repeated, walking toward them. The crowd parted automatically. "Because he's doing what every single person in this room should have done an hour ago." The drunk man paled. "Mr. Harrington, I didn't mean—" "You meant exactly what you said, David, and we'll discuss your employment status on Monday." Richard's gaze shifted to Ethan, something complex moving behind his eyes. "But right now, I believe my daughter was asked a question." All eyes turned to Lena. She looked at Ethan, really looked at him, like she was trying to solve an equation, searching for the catch, the trick, the inevitable moment when kindness revealed itself to be cruelty wearing a mask. Ethan understood that too. Had learned in the grief support groups that sometimes the hardest thing wasn't surviving loss, but learning to trust that something good could happen without being ripped away. "I'm not very good at dancing," Lena said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "That makes 2 of us." Ethan held out his hand. "We'll figure it out together." For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. The entire ballroom held its breath. The orchestra played on, oblivious, as hundreds of people in designer clothes watched a waiter and a scarred child decide the kind of world they wanted to live in. Then Lena placed her small hand in his, and the room exhaled. Ethan led her onto the dance floor, acutely aware of every eye tracking their movement. His serving jacket felt suddenly shabby next to her expensive dress. his scuffed shoes against her delicate flats. But he'd made a promise to his dying wife, and he'd made a choice for his living daughter. Some things mattered more than fitting in. The orchestra, sensing the shift in energy, transitioned into something slower, gentler, a melody that felt like possibility. "I don't know the steps," Lena admitted, looking down at their feet. "Then we'll make them up." Ethan positioned her hand on his shoulder, his on her waist, careful, respectful, the way he'd dance with Sophie when she stood on his feet in the kitchen. "The secret is, nobody really knows what they're doing. They're all just trying not to fall down and hoping it looks intentional." The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. They began to move. Not well. Ethan hadn't danced since Miranda, and Lena clearly had little practice. Their steps were uncertain, slightly offbeat, the kind of dancing that would never win awards or impress anyone. But something magical happened anyway. Because Ethan looked at Lena's face, at the scar everyone else seemed determined to stare at or ignore, and he didn't flinch, didn't look away. Didn't treat her like something broken that needed to be handled with nervous delicacy. He just danced with her, like she was exactly who she was supposed to be. And slowly, impossibly, the tension in her shoulders began to ease. Her steps grew more confident. Her gaze lifted from the floor to meet his, and in her eyes, he saw the reflection of something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Not the naive kind that pretended bad things didn't happen, but the harder, fiercer kind that insisted on finding light even in the darkness. The kind that said, "I've been hurt, but I'm still here. I still matter." The ballroom had gone completely silent now. Even the orchestra seemed to play more softly, like they were afraid to break whatever spell had been cast. Couples stopped dancing to watch. Conversations died. The world contracted to this one moment, this one dance, this one choice to see someone everyone else had deemed invisible. Lena's father stood at the edge of the dance floor, his hand pressed to his mouth, his shoulders shaking, not with anger, with something that looked like relief, like a dam finally breaking after holding back pressure for too long. And Ethan understood that Richard Harrington could move markets and topple companies and make the powerful tremble with a phone call, but he couldn't make people kind, couldn't force the world to see his daughter as anything other than her scar. Money couldn't buy what this moment gave her, dignity. "Thank you," Lena whispered as they turned slowly across the marble floor. "For what?" "For not pretending." She glanced at the scar self-consciously, then back to him. "Most people either stare like I'm a circus act or they try so hard not to look that it's worse. You just see me, the real me." Ethan's throat tightened. He thought about Sophie's picture books and Miranda's last words and all the small choices that added up to a life worth living. "The real you, Tets," he said, "deserves to be seen." The music swelled. They danced on, two people who didn't belong together by any logical measure, a waiter and an heiress, a nobody and a somebody, a man with empty pockets and a girl with every material advantage. But in that moment, none of it mattered, because they'd both known loss, both understood what it meant to be defined by the worst thing that ever happened to you, when you were so much more than your grief. The song ended, but neither of them moved immediately. The final note hung in the air like a question. Then applause started. Hesitant at first, one person, then two, then a wave spreading across the ballroom. Not the polite, obligatory clapping of social necessity, but something genuine. Something moved. Lena's eyes widened in shock. "They're clapping for us?" "They're clapping for you," Ethan corrected, "for being brave enough to take the chance." Richard Harrington reached them first, tears streaming openly down his face. He pulled his daughter into a fierce embrace, then extended his hand to Ethan. "Thank you." Richard's voice cracked. "Thank you for giving her what I couldn't." Before Ethan could respond, a commotion erupted near the ballroom entrance. The crowd shifted, and a small figure came running through, a blur of pink pajamas and wild curls. "Daddy!" "Sophie." Ethan's heart stopped. The babysitter, Mrs. Chen, hurried after her, looking mortified. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Brooks. She woke up and was inconsolable, kept saying she had to see you, that it was important. I didn't know what else to do." But Ethan barely heard the apology. He was kneeling, catching Sophie as she launched herself into his arms, holding her tight against his chest, and breathing in the familiar smell of her strawberry shampoo. "Baby, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in bed." Sophie pulled back, her serious face inches from his. In her hand, she clutched a piece of paper, one of her drawings, wrinkled from being held too tight. "I drew this at school today," she said urgently, "for the princess." "What princess?" "Her." Sophie pointed at Lena with absolute certainty. "The princess you were going to help. I dreamed about her, Daddy. I knew you'd find her." Ethan opened his mouth to explain that Lena wasn't actually a princess, but Sophie was already moving, walking right up to the girl who stood frozen in surprise. "This is for you," Sophie said, holding out the drawing with both hands like it was something precious. "I drew a princess who's really brave because she has a magic mark that shows she's special." Lena took the paper with trembling hands. Ethan couldn't see the drawing from his angle, but he saw Lena's face transform as she looked at it, saw tears well up and spill over. "You think I'm special?" Lena's voice was barely a whisper. "Duh." Sophie said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "All princesses are special. That's why they're princesses. And your mark proves your magic." The drawing showed a smiling girl with a crown and a jagged line down her face, not hidden or diminished, but decorated with stars and flowers. In Sophie's 6-year-old imagination, the scar wasn't a flaw. It was a feature, a badge of honor, the thing that made the princess special. Lena sank to her knees, pulling Sophie into a hug so tight it should have been uncomfortable. But Sophie just hugged back, patting Lena's shoulder with the kind of unconscious comfort that children offered so naturally and adults had forgotten how to give. "It's okay," Sophie murmured. "I know you're sad sometimes. My daddy gets sad about Mommy, but he says the sad doesn't mean we stop being happy. It just means we're brave enough to feel things." Richard Harrington made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. Ethan stood slowly, his knees protesting, and found himself facing the man whose daughter he'd just danced with, the billionaire whose empire could crush him without effort, the father who'd just watched a stranger do what money and power couldn't. They stared at each other across the small space. Around them, the ballroom had gone quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Anticipatory. Like everyone could sense that something important was happening, even if they didn't understand what. "Your daughter," Richard said carefully, "is extraordinary. She's everything good about her mother." The words came automatically, born from truth repeated so often it had become reflex. "I'm sorry for your loss. And I'm sorry for what people put yours through tonight." Richard's expression hardened. He turned to face the crowd, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of empire and fury combined. "I want to make something very clear," he said, "to everyone in this room. I built my company on the principle that character matters more than credentials, that integrity trumps image, that how we treat people when the world isn't watching defines us more than anything we do in the spotlight." He paused, letting the words sink in. Several people had the grace to look ashamed. "Tonight, I watched most of you fail that test. Spectacularly." Richard's gaze swept across the ballroom like a searchlight. "You whispered about my daughter, made jokes at her expense, treated her like something to be hidden rather than celebrated. And when a waiter, a man you wouldn't have given a second glance, showed more courage and compassion than this entire room combined, you wanted to punish him for making you look bad." The drunk man, David, tried to slip toward the exit. Richard's voice stopped him cold. "David Masters, you're fired, not just from your position at my company, but from any organization I have influence over, which, in this city, is considerable." Richard's smile was cold. "You wanted to make people feel small, to make yourself feel big. Let's see how big you feel when no one will hire you." David's face went from red to white. "You can't. This is my event, my money, my rules." Richard turned back to the crowd. "Anyone else have something to say about my daughter, about her scar, about whether she deserves to be here?" Silence. The kind that meant shame rather than agreement. "That's what I thought." Richard's expression softened as he looked at Lena, still kneeling with Sophie, both of them studying the drawing together. "My daughter survived something that would have destroyed most adults. She carries a mark of that survival, and I won't apologize for it. I won't hide it, and I sure as hell won't tolerate anyone making her feel less than perfect. He turned to Ethan. But you saw her, really saw her. Not her scar, not her last name, not what she could do for you. Just her. With respect, sir, Ethan said quietly. That's all anyone needs, to be seen for who they are. You have children? One. Sophie. Ethan glanced at his daughter, who was now showing Lena how to make a paper crown from a napkin. She's my whole world. Then you understand. Richard's eyes glistened. What it means to watch your child hurt and not be able to fix it, to have all the money in the world and still feel helpless. I do. They stood there, two fathers from different worlds, united by the impossible weight of loving someone you'd die for, but couldn't always protect. Richard reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. I want to offer you a position. Better pay, better hours. A real chance to... No. The word came out firmer than Ethan intended. He softened it with a smile. Thank you, truly. But I didn't do this for a reward. Then why? Ethan looked at Sophie, who was now trying to teach Lena a hand-clapping game, both girls laughing as they messed up the rhythm. He thought about Miranda, about the promises made and the lessons learned and the kind of man he wanted his daughter to grow up seeing. Because it was right, he said simply, because someone had to. And because I want Sophie to know that kindness doesn't have a price tag. Richard studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded, pocketing the card. You're either the most principled man I've ever met, or the most foolish. Can it be both? That earned a laugh, genuine and surprised. The tension broke like a fever, and suddenly Richard Harrington wasn't a billionaire anymore. He was just a dad, grateful and relieved and possibly a little bit in awe. Can I ask you something? Richard said. Of course. How did you know that Lena needed someone to dance with her? Ethan thought about it. About the posture he'd recognized and the grief he'd carried and the small voice reading picture books about heroes. I didn't know, he admitted, but I've been where she is. Maybe not the same circumstances, but the same feeling. Like the world decided who you are based on the worst thing that happened to you and nobody bothered to look deeper. When you lost your wife. It wasn't a question. Ethan nodded anyway. The first year, people were so kind. Too kind. In that performative way where you can tell they're just checking a box. How are you holding up? Let me know if you need anything. But nobody really wanted to know how I was holding up. And they definitely didn't want to hear that what I needed was my wife back. Richard's expression held understanding. They wanted you to be okay so they could be comfortable. Exactly. Ethan glanced at Lena. Your daughter has that same look. Like she's learned to make herself small so other people don't have to feel awkward about her pain. She has. Richard's voice was rough. The accident was 2 years ago. Car crash. Drunk driver ran a red light. Lena's mother didn't make it. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He'd assumed the scar came from some childhood accident, a fall or a medical procedure. Not this. Not the same loss that had hollowed him out and remade him into something harder. I'm so sorry. The scars from the airbag and broken glass, Richard continued like he needed to say it out loud. Doctors did what they could, but some things can't be fixed. Not completely. And people look at her and they see the scar, and they assume she's damaged, broken, less than. She's not. I know that, you know that, but the world... Richard gestured helplessly at the ballroom, at the people in designer clothes who'd shown their true colors. The world sees what it wants to see. Then we change what they see. Ethan met his gaze. We show them that your daughter is brave and strong and deserving of every good thing, scar or no scar. We make them uncomfortable with their cruelty until they either change or leave. That's easier said than done. Most worthwhile things are. They were interrupted by Sophie's delighted squeal. Both girls had crowned themselves with napkin tiaras and were now attempting to teach Mrs. Chen, the mortified babysitter, how to curtsy properly. I should probably get Sophie home, Ethan said reluctantly. It's way past her bedtime. Of course. Richard hesitated, then extended his hand. Thank you, Mr. Brooks, for giving my daughter something money can't buy. They shook, and Ethan felt something pass between them. Not obligation or debt, but recognition. Two men who understood that the most valuable things in life had nothing to do with bank accounts. Ethan gathered Sophie up, trying to ignore her protests about leaving her new friend. "We'll see her again, baby, but right now, you need sleep." "But Daddy, we were going to teach her the dragon dance." "Another time." As they headed for the exit, Margaret intercepted them, her expression torn between relief and resignation. "Brooks, I don't even know what to say." "I'm fired, aren't I?" "Are you kidding? Mr. Harrington just tripled your overtime rate and gave you a paid week off." She shook her head in wonder. "I've worked here 15 years and never seen anything like that." "I didn't do it for—" "I know." Margaret's eyes were soft. That's why it mattered. The night air hit them like a baptism as they stepped outside. Cool and clean, washing away the perfume and politics and pretense of the ballroom. Ethan breathed deep, letting it fill his lungs and clear his head. Sophie was already drowsing on his shoulder, her paper crown askew, her hand still clutching the marker she'd used for the drawing. In sleep, she looked so much like Miranda, it hurt. "Did I do good, Daddy?" she murmured. "You did amazing, sweetheart. The princess needed a friend, just like you did, when you were sad." Ethan's steps faltered. "What do you mean?" "After Mommy went to sleep forever, you were so sad, but then people helped you, like Miss Sarah and Mr. Miguel and Mrs. Chen. They were your friends when you needed them." Sophie's eyes drifted closed. "So you helped the princess, because heroes help people." Out of the mouths of babes. Ethan held his daughter closer as they walked to the bus stop, his serving jacket keeping out the worst of the chill. Behind them, the Grandview Hotel glowed like a jewel box, full of beautiful people and ugly truths. But inside, one little girl was learning that her scar didn't define her, that kindness existed, that sometimes, when the world was cruel, a stranger might step up and remind you of your worth. It wasn't enough to fix everything. One dance couldn't erase 2 years of grief and cruelty and learning to make yourself small. But it was a beginning, a crack in the wall that isolation had built. And sometimes, Ethan thought, as the bus pulled up and he climbed aboard with his sleeping daughter, that's all anyone needed. Not a perfect solution, just proof that things could be different, that people could choose kindness over comfort, that heroes didn't need capes or money or power. Sometimes they just needed to show up and see someone, really see them. The bus pulled away from the curb, carrying them toward home and bed and tomorrow's challenges. But Ethan's mind stayed in that ballroom, watching a scarred girl smile for what might have been the first time in months. He'd told Richard that he didn't do it for a reward. That was true. But sitting there on the bus with Sophie warm against his chest and the city lights blurring past, Ethan realized he'd gotten one anyway. He'd gotten to be the person Miranda believed he could be, the father Sophie needed him to be, the man who chose courage over comfort and compassion over compliance. And in a world that too often rewarded the opposite, that felt like something worth holding on to. The bus rumbled on through the night, carrying two souls who'd learned that the smallest gestures could echo the loudest. That dignity given freely was worth more than gold. That sometimes the greatest act of rebellion was simply treating someone like they mattered. Behind them, in that glittering ballroom, Richard Harrington sat with his daughter in his lap while she explained the detailed backstory of the princess in Sophie's drawing. Around them, the gala continued, but it had changed. Become smaller, less important, because everyone in that room now understood what they'd witnessed. Not a waiter breaking protocol, not a charity case being pitied, but something fundamental about what it meant to be human. The choice to see each other. Really see each other. Past the scars and the status and the stories we tell ourselves about who deserves kindness. It was a lesson that should have been simple. That used to be simple, before the world complicated it with hierarchies and prejudices and 1,000 ways to excuse looking away. But sometimes it took a single father and his daughter to remind everyone of what they'd forgotten. That every person in that room, rich or poor, scarred or smooth, powerful or struggling, was just trying to get through the night, trying to matter, trying to be seen for who they really were, not who circumstances had made them. And on this particular night, in this particular ballroom, two people had gotten exactly that. Not a cure, not a miracle, just the simple radical act of being acknowledged, of having someone say, without words, "I see you, you matter, your pain is real, but it doesn't define your worth." It was everything. And it was only the beginning. The weekend passed in a blur of normal chaos. Sophie's cartoons, laundry that never seemed to end, and the persistent drip in the bathroom sink that Ethan kept meaning to fix. But underneath the mundane rhythm of single parenthood, something had shifted. He couldn't stop thinking about Lena's face when she'd accepted his hand. That moment of hesitation before trust. The way her whole body had seemed to exhale when she realized he wasn't going to hurt her. Monday morning arrived with rain hammering against the apartment windows, and Sophie's declaration that she absolutely, definitely, no question about it, needed to wear her princess dress to school. "Baby, it's pouring outside. How about your jeans and the purple shirt?" "But Daddy..." Sophie stood in her doorway with her hands on her hips, a perfect miniature of Miranda's stubborn stance. "I promised Lena I'd be a princess too. Princesses keep their promises." Ethan paused mid-coffee pour. "When did you promise Lena that?" "At the party. When you weren't listening because you were talking to her daddy." Sophie's matter-of-fact tone suggested this should have been obvious. "She said she'd try to be brave like a princess, and I said I'd be one too so she wouldn't be alone." The coffee suddenly tasted bitter in Ethan's mouth. He set down the mug and knelt to Sophie's level. "That's a really beautiful promise, sweetheart. But you know Lena goes to a different school than you, right? She won't see your dress." "She'll know." Sophie tapped her chest with absolute certainty. In her heart, that's how princess promises work. There was no arguing with 6-year-old logic, especially when it came from a place of pure compassion. Ethan helped her into the slightly too small dress, made a mental note to check the thrift stores for the next size up, and sent her off with Mrs. Chen wearing rain boots and a tiara. His own shift at the Grandview didn't start until evening, which meant he had the day to tackle the growing list of things he'd been putting off. Bills, grocery shopping, calling the landlord about the heating that only worked when it felt like it. The usual symphony of struggle that composed his life. But when he opened his laptop to check his bank account, an email sat waiting at the top of his inbox. From Richard Harrington. Subject: a conversation. Ethan's finger hovered over the delete button. Whatever this was, it felt dangerous, like standing at the edge of something that could change everything, and change was terrifying even when it promised to be good. He opened it anyway. "Mr. Brooks, I hope you'll forgive the intrusion. I acquired your contact information from the Grandview's HR department, ethically, I assure you, and with their full cooperation given the circumstances of Friday evening. My daughter hasn't stopped talking about you and Sophie. She's asked me 17 times, I counted, when she might see Sophie again. This is significant, as Lena hasn't asked to see anyone in nearly 2 years. I'd like to invite you and your daughter to lunch this Saturday. Nothing formal, just 4 people sharing a meal. Lena specifically requested somewhere with crayons, which I'm interpreting as family-friendly. I realize this is unusual. I'm not in the habit of developing friendships with hotel staff, and I suspect you're not in the habit of dining with billionaires, but perhaps that's exactly why it might be worthwhile. Let me be clear, this isn't charity. It's not a business proposition. It's simply a father trying to give his daughter something she desperately needs. A friend who sees her, not her scar. Your daughter gave mine that gift. I'm hoping we can build on it. Please consider it. Richard Harrington. Ethan read the email 3 times, looking for the catch. There had to be one. People like Richard Harrington didn't just invite people like Ethan Brooks to lunch without an agenda. Except the email didn't feel manipulative. It felt like what it claimed to be. A father reaching out to another father, hoping to preserve something fragile and good. His phone rang before he could overthink it further. Unknown number. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something made him answer. "Mr. Brooks, this is Jennifer Caldwell from the Grandview Hotel." Ethan's stomach dropped. Here it came, the real fallout. Margaret had been kind, but the hotel's corporate office probably had different ideas about waiters who made scenes at their most exclusive events. "I'm calling regarding Friday's gala," Jennifer continued, her tone professionally neutral. "We need to discuss your employment status." "I understand." Ethan kept his voice steady. He'd been fired before. He'd survive it again. "I know I stepped out of line." "Stepped out of line?" Jennifer's laugh surprised him. "Mr. Brooks, our social media has exploded. The gala made the local news. We've had 3 major publications reach out for interviews. And do you know what they're all saying? That I disrupted a private event? That you reminded everyone what hospitality actually means. Papers rustled in the background. The Grandview has built its reputation on service excellence. You embodied that in a way no training manual could teach. So no, we're not firing you. We're promoting you. The words took a moment to penetrate. I'm sorry, what? Guest Relations Coordinator. $23 an hour, health benefits, consistent schedule. You'd be working directly with our event planning team to ensure every guest feels valued and seen. Jennifer paused. I know it's not much compared to what Mr. Harrington probably offered, but it's what we can do. Ethan sat down hard on his threadbare couch. $23 an hour. Health benefits. A schedule that might actually let him have breakfast with Sophie instead of just leaving notes on the counter. Mr. Brooks? Are you still there? I'm here. His voice cracked. Yes. Thank you. Yes, I accept. Excellent. HR will be in touch about paperwork and start date. And Mr. Brooks, what you did Friday night. That's the kind of people we want representing the Grandview. After she hung up, Ethan sat in the silence of his apartment, rain drumming against the windows, and let himself feel the full weight of what had just happened. One choice. One moment of choosing kindness over comfort, and his life was changing because of it, not in some fairy tale way where all his problems disappeared. $23 an hour still meant budgeting carefully and watching sales and hoping the car lasted another year. But it meant breathing room. It meant Sophie could do soccer if she wanted. It meant maybe, possibly, he could start putting something away for her college fund. It meant hope. Real, tangible hope. He pulled up Richard's email and hit reply before he could second-guess himself. Mr. Harrington, Saturday works for us. Sophie will be thrilled. She's been asking when she'll see the princess again. One condition. We split the bill. I know that probably seems ridiculous to you, but it matters to me. This is friendship, not charity. Friends share. Looking forward to it. Ethan Brooks. The response came within minutes. Deal. Though I reserve the right to buy the girls ice cream without negotiation. That's a grandfather privilege I'm claiming preemptively. There's a place called Rosie's Diner on 5th Street. Excellent pancakes, crayons on every table, and they won't bat an eye at napkin crowns. 1 p.m.? Ethan smiled despite himself. Perfect. The week crawled by with the peculiar slowness of anticipation. Ethan worked his remaining shifts at the Grandview with a strange new awareness. He noticed things he'd trained himself not to see. The elderly woman eating alone in the hotel restaurant every Tuesday, always ordering the same meal. The businessman who thanked servers by name and left generous tips. The couple celebrating an anniversary with cheap champagne because it was all they could afford, but love demanded celebration anyway. Small moments of humanity in a place designed to feel grand and impersonal. On Thursday, Miguel cornered him in the kitchen during the dinner rush. So you're really leaving us for the fancy guest relations job? It's not that fancy. I'll probably still be dealing with complaints about room temperature and missing towels. Yeah, but you'll be doing it with health insurance. Miguel flipped a steak with practiced precision. Man, I'm happy for you. Truly. But who's going to keep me sane when the entitled jerks show up? Sarah's got your back. Sarah cries when people yell at her. She's getting better about that. Miguel shook his head, but he was smiling. Just promise you won't forget about us when you're schmoozing with the rich folks. The rich folks are just people, Miguel. Some good, some terrible, most somewhere in between. Ethan grabbed the plates from the pass. Friday night taught me that. Friday night taught all of us something. Miguel's expression turned serious. You know how many times I've watched someone be cruel to a kid and done nothing? Told myself it wasn't my business, not my problem. Then you went and made it your business, and suddenly I had to look at all the times I didn't. I wasn't trying to make anyone feel guilty. I know. That's what made it worse. Miguel returned to his station. Go on, get those steaks out before they get cold. And Ethan? That little girl, Sophie, she's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her. Friday evening, Ethan picked Sophie up from Mrs. Chen's to find her covered in paint and vibrating with excitement. Daddy, guess what? We made friendship bracelets in art class, and I made one for Lena and one for you and one for her daddy, because he seemed sad. And Miss Kelly said giving gifts makes sad people happy. She thrust 3 tangled messes of yarn and beads at him. They were objectively terrible, uneven, knotted, the kind of craft project only a parent could love. They were perfect. These are beautiful, baby. Do you think Lena will like hers? I used purple because that's a princess color, and I put a star bead because of the drawing, and... Sophie paused for breath. When do we see them again? Tomorrow. Lunch at a diner. The shriek that followed probably violated noise ordinances. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, smiling. I take it you told her about Saturday. I made the mistake of confirming before getting her into the car. A rookie error, Mr. Brooks. Mrs. Chen's eyes sparkled. She's been talking about this Lena all week. It's nice to see her so excited about a friend. That night, after Sophie finally crashed from excitement exhaustion, Ethan sat at their tiny kitchen table and looked at the friendship bracelets. Such simple things. Yarn and plastic beads that probably cost $3 total. But Sophie had poured intention into every messy knot, the desire to make someone happy, to bridge the gap between their worlds with something handmade and honest. She got that from Miranda. The belief that love showed up in small gestures, that you didn't need money to make someone feel valued. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Richard. Lena wanted me to tell you that she picked out her favorite dress for tomorrow. She's been practicing smiling in the mirror. I didn't realize how much I missed seeing her excited about something until this week. Thank you for that. Ethan stared at the message for a long moment before responding. Sophie made friendship bracelets. Fair warning, they're architecturally unsound but made with love. The best things usually are. Saturday arrived with clear skies and Sophie awake at dawn, her princess dress already on despite Ethan's protest that they had 6 hours until lunch. I need to make sure it's perfect, Daddy. First impressions are important. Pretty sure Lena's first impression of you was in pajamas at her father's gala. That was different. That was an emergency princess situation. Sophie spoke with the authority of someone who'd clearly given this considerable thought. This is an official friend meeting. It requires proper attire. There was no arguing with that logic. They spent the morning in careful preparation. Sophie insisted on braiding her hair like Lena's, which resulted in something that looked more like a bird's nest, but she loved it. Ethan ironed his one decent button-down shirt, the one without frayed cuffs. They were going as their best selves, which still meant thrift store clothes and scuffed shoes, but it was honest. Rosie's Diner sat on a corner that gentrification hadn't quite reached yet. Red vinyl booths, black and white checkered floors, and the smell of coffee and bacon grease that spoke of 1,000 breakfasts served to people who needed comfort more than fancy. It was perfect. Richard and Lena were already there when they arrived, sitting in a corner booth. Lena wore a lavender dress with white flowers, her hair down this time, partially covering the scar. But when she saw Sophie, her face lit up with something that made the covering irrelevant. Sophie! The girls collided in a hug that nearly knocked over a water glass. Richard caught it with the reflexes of a practiced father, sharing a look with Ethan that said everything about the chaos and joy of daughters. Thank you for coming, Richard said, standing to shake Ethan's hand. Up close, without the armor of a tuxedo and power, he looked tired, human. Lena's been counting down the days. So has Sophie. Fair warning, she's brought crafts. They slid into the booth, girls on one side already deep in conversation, fathers on the other trying to figure out how to navigate this strange new dynamic. A waitress appeared with menus and a smile that had seen it all. What can I get you folks started with? Chocolate milk, Sophie announced, with extra chocolate if that's allowed. For you, princess, anything's allowed, the waitress winked. And for you, sweetheart? She addressed Lena with the same warmth, not even glancing at the scar. Lena's voice came out soft but clear. The same, please. As the waitress left, Ethan watched Lena relax incrementally. This was a place where nobody knew her last name or her father's net worth, where a scar was just another part of someone's story, not the whole story. So, Richard said, breaking the ice, Lena tells me Sophie goes to Madison Elementary. She does, just finished first grade. Lena's at Ashworth Academy. Richard's tone carried something apologetic. Private school, small classes. I thought it would be better for her after everything. Is it? Richard looked at his daughter, who was showing Sophie how to make a paper crane from her napkin. I don't know anymore. The academics are excellent. The facilities are top-notch. But the kids there, he trailed off. They're cruel, Ethan finished quietly. Not all of them, but enough. Richard's jaw tightened. Their parents are people like David Masters, the man I fired at the gala. They teach their children that worth is measured in bank accounts and appearances, that someone like Lena is less because she's different. The waitress returned with chocolate milk so thick with syrup it was practically dessert. Sophie took a sip and came up with a chocolate mustache that made Lena giggle. You know what? Sophie said seriously. At my school, there's a boy named Marcus who has one arm. And on the first day, some kids were being mean about it. But then Marcus won the relay race at recess and everybody thought he was cool. Maybe Lena should come to our school. The words hung in the air. Innocent, impossible, but carrying a truth that made both fathers pause. That's a sweet thought, honey, Ethan said carefully. But Lena's school is really good. Is it? Lena's voice was so quiet they almost missed it. Is it really good if everyone there makes me feel bad? Richard's face went through several emotions at once. Lena, sweetheart, we've talked about this. Ashworth has resources that other schools don't. The counselors, the small class sizes, the kids who whisper about my face, the teacher who always puts me in the back for photos, the mothers who tell their daughters they can't be my friend because I'm going through things. Lena's hands clenched around her chocolate milk. I heard Mrs. Patterson tell her daughter that last week. She didn't think I was listening. The pain in Richard's eyes was physical. Ethan recognized it, the helpless rage of wanting to protect your child from a world determined to hurt them. I didn't know about Mrs. Patterson, Richard said finally. You should have told me. What would you have done? Fired her husband? Made them leave the school? Lena's voice carried a weariness beyond her years. That just makes it worse, Dad. Then I'm not just the scarred girl. I'm the scarred girl whose rich father punishes anyone who's mean to her. So what do you want me to do? Lena looked at Sophie, then back at her father. I want to go to a school where nobody knows who we are, where I'm just Lena, not Richard Harrington's damaged daughter. The silence that followed felt heavy with possibility and impossibility all tangled together. Sophie, oblivious to the weight of adult complications, pulled out the friendship bracelets. I made these for you. This one's yours, and this one's for your dad, and this one's for my dad, so we're all connected. She demonstrated by putting hers on, then helping Lena with the complicated knots. The purple yarn sat bright against Lena's pale wrist. Imperfect, handmade, honest. Richard accepted his with a solemnity that suggested he understood the gift's true value. Thank you, Sophie. I'll treasure this. You have to wear it until it falls off, Sophie instructed. Those are the rules. That way, whenever you look at it, you remember that you have friends. Ethan tied his own bracelet on, the yarn scratchy against his skin. Across the table, Richard did the same. Two men from different worlds, connected by their daughter's innocent wisdom and their shared understanding of what it meant to love someone more than yourself. The food arrived. Pancakes and bacon and eggs scrambled soft. Simple diner fare that tasted like comfort. They ate and talked, and slowly the conversation found its rhythm. Sophie told increasingly elaborate stories about her school adventures. Lena shared her love of drawing and the art lessons she took on Thursdays. The fathers relaxed incrementally, finding common ground in their shared exhaustion and devotion. Can I ask you something? Richard said during a lull while the girls colored on the paper placemats. At the gala, you didn't hesitate. How did you know it was the right thing to do? Ethan thought about it, about Miranda's death and Sophie's questions and all the small moments that had led to that larger choice. I didn't know it was right, he admitted. I knew it was necessary. There's a difference. Explain. Right implies certainty, like there's a clear answer and you just have to be smart enough to see it. Ethan watched Sophie draw a castle with Lena adding princesses to the towers. But most of life isn't like that. Most of the time, you're just doing your best with incomplete information and hoping you don't screw it up too badly. That's parenting in a nutshell. That's everything in a nutshell. Ethan smiled without humor. When Miranda got sick, everyone had opinions about the right way to handle it. The right treatments, the right attitude, the right way to prepare Sophie for loss. But none of it was actually right. It was just different versions of trying to control something uncontrollable. Richard's expression held recognition. Lena's mother, Claire, died instantly in the crash. No time for goodbyes or preparation. Just there one moment and gone the next. I'm so sorry. Everyone is. Everyone's so sorry. Richard's voice held an edge. But sorry doesn't bring her back. Sorry doesn't explain to a 7-year-old why mommy isn't coming home. Sorry doesn't stop the nightmares or the guilt or the way Lena still sets the table for 4 people sometimes. Sophie does that too. Asks me to make Miranda's favorite meals even though Miranda isn't here to eat them. They sat with that shared grief for a moment. The girls, sensing the shift in mood, looked over with concern. Are you sad, Daddy? Lena asked. A little, Richard admitted. But it's okay to be sad sometimes. Miss Sophie's daddy looks sad too. Sophie reached across the table to pat Ethan's hand. It's okay, Daddy. Remember what you told me? Sad doesn't mean we stop being happy. It just means we're brave enough to feel things. Ethan's eyes burned. Those were his words, coming back to remind him of his own advice. You're right, baby. Thank you for remembering. The waitress returned with the check and a smile. You folks need anything else? Ice cream, maybe? Actually, Richard said, pulling out his wallet, I believe I claimed grandfather privileges on ice cream. You're not a grandfather, Ethan pointed out. Honorary grandfather. It's a preemptive title. They argued good-naturedly about the bill, Ethan insisting on splitting it, Richard pointing out that he'd invited them, Ethan countering that friendship meant equality. Finally, they compromised. Ethan paid for lunch. Richard bought ice cream at the shop next door. The ice cream shop was the kind of place that hadn't changed in 30 years and didn't need to. 23 flavors, waffle cones made fresh, and a patient teenager behind the counter who didn't rush the girls' agonized deliberation between chocolate chip and strawberry. They ended up outside on a bench, ice cream dripping in the afternoon sun, watching the street life flow past. A perfectly normal Saturday for dozens of families doing perfectly normal things. Except nothing about this was normal. A billionaire and a waiter. A private school kid and a public school kid. 2 widowers and their daughters, connected by grief and kindness, and the fragile hope that maybe, possibly, the world could be kinder than it usually was. I've been thinking about what Lena said, Richard spoke quietly, while the girls chased a friendly dog 2 shops down, about wanting to go to a school where nobody knows who we are. It's a nice fantasy. Is it, though? Just a fantasy? Richard turned to face him. I've spent 2 years trying to protect her by controlling her environment, the best schools, the best doctors, the best therapy. But maybe the best thing isn't the most expensive thing. Maybe it's just normalcy. With respect, you can't just unrich yourself. People will always know who you are. In this city, yes, but there are other cities, other places where the Harrington name doesn't open doors or close them. Richard's expression held something between desperation and determination. I've been thinking about relocating anyway. The company's expanding to the West Coast. I could run operations from Portland or Seattle. Start fresh where Lena could just be Lena, Ethan finished. Exactly. That's a huge decision. So was asking a stranger to dance with my daughter. Richard smiled. But that turned out pretty well. Sophie came running back, the dog's owner trailing apologetically behind. Daddy, Daddy, Mr. Peterson says his dog's name is Biscuit, and she loves children, and can we please get a dog? We've talked about this, baby. Our apartment doesn't allow pets. What if we moved to a place that did? Before Ethan could answer, his phone rang, the Grandview Hotel. He excused himself to take it. Mr. Brooks, this is Stephen from maintenance. We've got a situation in the ballroom and nobody can find Margaret. You start your new position Monday, but given what happened last week, we thought maybe you could help. What kind of situation? Remember David Masters, the guy Mr. Harrington fired? He's in the ballroom with about 6 friends, all drunk, demanding to be served. Says they have a reservation. When Alicia tried to explain that Mr. Masters is banned from the property, he threw a glass at her. Ethan's blood went cold. Is she okay? Shaken but unharmed. Building security is here, but these guys are making a scene and we've got guests complaining. Could you? I'm on my way. He hung up to find Richard watching him with concern. Problem? David Masters and his friend showed up drunk at the hotel. They're causing problems. Richard's expression hardened. That's harassment. I'll call my lawyers. Or we could handle it ourselves. Ethan glanced at the girls, still fussing over Biscuit, the friendly dog. Together. Understanding passed between them. Sophie, Ethan called. We need to make a quick stop at Daddy's work. Is that okay? Can Lena come? Richard looked like he wanted to argue, to keep his daughter away from potential ugliness. But then Lena piped up, Please, Dad, I want to help. And maybe that's what decided it. The fact that his daughter wanted to help instead of hide. All right, Richard agreed. But you girls stay with us. No wandering off. The Grandview Hotel's ballroom looked different in afternoon light. Less magical, more like what it was. A room designed to separate people with money from people without it, all dressed up in crystal and gold leaf. David Masters and his companions had commandeered a corner table, empty bottles already accumulating. When he saw Ethan enter, his face twisted into something ugly. Well, well, if it isn't the hero waiter. David's words slurred together. Come to save more freaks? Richard stepped forward, every inch the billionaire who'd built an empire. David, I thought I made myself clear about you being unwelcome here. You don't own this place, Harrington. You don't own the whole damn city, even if you think you do. Actually, a new voice cut in. Margaret had arrived, looking furious. Mr. Harrington is on our board of directors. So when he says you're banned, you're banned. I've called the police. You have 2 minutes to leave peacefully or leave in handcuffs. Your choice. David stood, swaying. His friends looked uncertain now, the alcohol-fueled bravado fading in the face of real consequences. This is because of that brat in her face, isn't it? David sneered. Couldn't just accept that some people don't want to look at... He didn't finish the sentence. Because Lena stepped forward, her small hand finding Sophie's, both girls standing together with a courage that shamed every adult in the room. My name is Lena, she said clearly. Not brat, not freak. Lena. And my face tells a story about surviving something terrible. What story does yours tell? That you're mean when you're drunk? That you hurt people because it makes you feel big? The silence was absolute. David opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. But before he could respond, sirens cut through the afternoon. The police had arrived. What followed was anticlimax. David and his friends escorted out, trespassing warnings issued, statements taken. Through it all, Lena stood tall, her hand still clasped in Sophie's. When it was over, Margaret pulled Ethan aside. That's Richard Harrington's daughter? Yeah. She's got more spine than most adults I know. Margaret shook her head in wonder. Including me. I should have kicked those guys out the moment they got belligerent. I was scared of making a scene. Sometimes scenes need making. Apparently, Margaret smiled. See you Monday for your first day in guest relations? I'll be here. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The girls sat on the hotel steps, exhausted from adrenaline, still holding hands. That was very brave, Richard told his daughter, but also very scary. You know you didn't have to confront him, right? I know. Lena looked up at him. But I'm tired of being scared, Dad. I'm tired of letting people like him make me feel small. When did you get so wise? I learned it from you, and from Sophie, and from Mr. Brooks. Lena smiled, and it reached her eyes. I learned that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway. Ethan and Richard exchanged glances over their daughters' heads. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that their children were teaching them just as much as they were teaching their children. So, Richard said as they walked toward the parking lot, about that school question. What if it wasn't just a fantasy? What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe both our families could use a fresh start. A place where Lena isn't defined by her last name or her scar, where Sophie can have a friend who gets what it means to lose a mother. Richard paused. I'm suggesting that maybe we could help each other. It was too much, too fast, too impossible to even consider seriously. And yet, Ethan thought about his cramped apartment and double shifts and the way Sophie's face lit up when she talked about Lena. Thought about Miranda's last words. Give her a good life. Don't just survive. Live. Let me think about it, he heard himself say. Take all the time you need. Richard handed him a card. That's my personal number. When you're ready to talk, call me. No pressure, no expectations, just possibility. They parted in the parking lot, the girls hugging goodbye like they'd been friends for years instead of a week. As Ethan drove home with Sophie chattering about Biscuit the dog and Lena's bravery and whether they could have pancakes for dinner, his mind spun with questions. Could he really uproot their life? Leave the city where Miranda was buried, where every street corner held memories? Risk everything on the unlikely friendship between a billionaire and a waiter? But then Sophie said, Daddy, do you think if we moved somewhere new, we could bring Mommy's garden stones with us? So she'd be there too? And Ethan realized that Miranda wasn't in the city or the apartment or even the cemetery. She was in Sophie's questions and kindness, in the lessons she'd taught them both about living with open hands and open hearts. She was wherever they chose to take her memory. Yeah, baby, he said softly. We could bring the garden stones. Good. Sophie went back to her drawing. Because Lena needs a friend. And you need a friend too, Daddy. I heard you tell Uncle Miguel that loneliness is the hardest part. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Ethan sat at their kitchen table with a pen and paper. On one side, he listed all the reasons staying made sense: stability, familiarity, the few friends they had, Miranda's memory anchored in the local geography. On the other side, possibility. Just that one word. But it contained multitudes. The possibility of breathing room, of Sophie having a friend who understood loss, of building something new from the ashes of what they'd lost, of proving that one dance, one choice, one moment of courage could ripple outward and change everything. His phone buzzed. A text from Richard. Lena drew this tonight. Thought you should see it. The attached image showed a crayon drawing, 2 girls holding hands, 2 dads standing behind them, all 4 wearing yarn bracelets. Above them, 2 figures drawn in lighter colors, like ghosts or angels. One labeled Mommy Claire, one labeled Mommy Miranda. Below, in Lena's careful handwriting, families come in all shapes. Ours is a good shape. Ethan's eyes blurred. He saved the image, then pulled up Richard's contact information. His finger hovered over the call button. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he'd call and they'd talk seriously about this impossible, terrifying, wonderful possibility. But tonight he allowed himself to hope, to imagine a world where kindness compounded, where the choice to see someone truly could echo forward and create something beautiful, where 2 broken families might just possibly help each other heal. The call came on Tuesday morning while Ethan was sorting through boxes in their apartment, trying to decide what could be donated and what absolutely had to make the journey west. Sophie sat cross-legged on the living room floor, wrapping her stuffed animals in newspaper like fragile treasures, narrating elaborate goodbye speeches to each room. Mr. Brooks, this is Amanda from Ashworth Academy. The voice on the phone was professionally pleasant. I'm calling regarding an incident involving Lena Harrington yesterday. We need to schedule a meeting with you and Mr. Harrington as soon as possible. Ethan's stomach dropped. What kind of incident? Is Lena okay? She's physically fine, but there was an altercation in the cafeteria. Lena became quite aggressive with another student, and given the circumstances, we feel it's best to discuss this in person. Aggressive. Lena. The words didn't fit together in any logical order. I'll be there, Ethan said. But I'm not Lena's father. I'm just a family friend. Mr. Harrington specifically requested your presence. He said you'd understand the context better than most. Amanda's tone suggested she found this highly irregular. Can you make 2 o'clock today? After hanging up, Ethan called Richard. The phone rang 4 times before connecting to a background of muffled voices and what sounded like a board meeting in progress. Ethan, I'm sorry. I should have called you first. Richard sounded exhausted. Lena got into a fight at school. She won't tell me what happened, but the other girl's parents are threatening legal action, and the school is acting like Lena committed assault. What actually happened? According to witnesses, Madison Whitmore said something to Lena in the lunch line. Lena responded by dumping her entire tray on Madison's head, then told her, and I'm quoting here, "My face tells a story about surviving. Yours just tells me your daddy bought your personality." Richard's voice held equal parts horror and pride. "She's suspended for 3 days pending our meeting with the administration." Despite everything, Ethan felt his lips twitch. That's pretty articulate for a 9-year-old in the heat of the moment. She's been practicing comebacks with Sophie over video chat. Apparently this was one of their prepared responses for bullies. Richard sighed. "I don't know whether to punish her or applaud her." "Probably both." "What did Madison say to her?" "That's what Lena won't tell me. She just keeps saying it doesn't matter, that she's not going back to Ashworth anyway." Papers rustled. "Look, I know this is asking a lot, but could you come to this meeting? Lena's been asking for you, and honestly, I could use the moral support. These people, they look at me and see dollar signs and legal liability. They might actually listen to you." 2 hours later, Ethan found himself walking through the pristine halls of Ashworth Academy. Sophie's hand tightened his. He'd had no choice but to bring her. Mrs. Chen had a doctor's appointment, and his new position at the Grandview didn't start until Monday. The school receptionist had given Sophie's thrift store dress and worn sneakers a look that could have frozen water. "Remember what we talked about?" Ethan told Sophie quietly as they waited in the administration office. "You need to be very quiet during this meeting. Can you do that for me?" "I can be quiet as a mouse, Daddy," Sophie mimed, zipping her lips. "But if they're mean to Lena, I might need to accidentally forget how to be quiet." "Sophie, I'm just saying. Princesses defend each other." Richard arrived moments later, still in his suit from whatever meeting he'd abandoned. Lena trailed behind him, her eyes red from crying, but her jaw set in stubborn defiance. When she saw Sophie, something in her face cracked. "You came," Lena whispered. "Of course we came." Sophie hugged her fiercely. "That's what friends do." They were ushered into a conference room that probably cost more to furnish than Ethan's annual salary. Principal Morrison sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 other administrators, whose nameplates declared them to be the Dean of Students and the head of Parent Relations. Across from them sat Madison Whitmore's parents, the father in an expensive suit that screamed corporate lawyer, the mother dripping with jewelry that screamed trophy wife. "Thank you for coming," Principal Morrison began with the kind of diplomatic smile that meant absolutely nothing. "I know this is difficult for everyone. Let's start by reviewing what happened." "What happened," Mrs. Whitmore cut in, her voice sharp as a blade, "is that this child," she pointed at Lena like she was evidence in a trial, "assaulted our daughter without provocation." Madison came home covered in food, traumatized and crying. "We've already consulted with our attorneys about pressing charges." "Lena," Principal Morrison said gently, "can you tell us your side of the story?" Lena stared at the table, silent. "Sweetheart," Richard tried, "I know you're upset, but you need to explain what Madison said to you." "It doesn't matter what she said." Lena's voice was barely audible. "Nobody here cares anyway." "We care very much," the Dean of Students interjected. "Ashworth Academy has a zero-tolerance policy for violence, but we also have policies against bullying. If Madison provoked you verbally—" "Oh, please," Mr. Whitmore leaned back in his chair. "Madison is a straight-A student from a good family. She doesn't bully anyone. Your daughter Harrington has been a discipline problem since she enrolled. This is just the latest incident." Richard's hands clenched into fists. "My daughter has never been in trouble before yesterday. Perhaps not formally, but the teachers have reported that she's withdrawn, uncooperative, and resistant to social integration." The head of Parent Relations consulted her notes. Just last week, she refused to participate in the class photo. The week before, she skipped the school assembly. This is a pattern of antisocial behavior. Or, Ethan heard himself say, it's a pattern of a grieving child trying to protect herself in an environment that's made her feel unwelcome. Every head in the room turned to him. Principal Morrison's eyebrows rose. "And you are?" "Ethan Brooks, a family friend." He kept his voice level. "I was there the night Mr. Harrington discovered how the parents at your fundraiser gala treated his daughter. I watched grown adults mock a 9-year-old girl for surviving a tragedy. So forgive me if I'm skeptical that the problem here is Lena's attitude. That's completely inappropriate, Mrs. Whitmore sputtered. We don't know what you're talking about. You were at table 12, Ethan said quietly. You told your companion that it was tragic Richard hadn't kept Lena home. You called the event a charity case. I was serving champagne 6 feet away. The color drained from Mrs. Whitmore's face. Her husband's jaw tightened. Principal Morrison cleared his throat. Mr. Brooks, while I appreciate your perspective, this meeting is about a specific incident of physical aggression. Whatever happened at a private event doesn't excuse. Madison said my mom deserved to die. Lena's voice cut through the room like a thunderclap. She lifted her head, tears streaming down her face, but her eyes blazing with fury and pain. She said my mom deserved to die because she was stupid enough to let a scarred freak like me in the car with her. She said that's probably why the drunk driver hit us, because even strangers could tell I was better off dead. Lena's hands shook. So I dumped my tray on her head, and I'd do it again. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the Whitmores seemed shocked into speechlessness. Richard's face had gone white. Madison said that to you? In front of 6 other kids in the lunch line. They all heard. Lena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But nobody's going to back me up because Madison's popular, and I'm just the weird girl with the messed up face. So it doesn't matter what I say. Nobody believes me anyway. I believe you, Sophie said into the shocked quiet. She'd climbed down from her chair and moved to stand beside Lena, her small hand finding the older girl's. And if Madison said that, then she's a bad person who needs to learn that words hurt people. Young lady, Principal Morrison said with strained patience, this is an adult conversation. Then maybe the adults should act like adults instead of bullies. Sophie's voice carried Miranda's stubborn certainty. My mommy died too, and if someone said she deserved it, I'd dump food on their head, and then I'd dump more food, and then I'd tell everyone they said something mean and terrible. Sophie, Ethan warned, but his heart wasn't in it. Because she was right. The head of parent relations shifted uncomfortably. These are very serious accusations, Lena. Do you have any proof that Madison said these things? She doesn't need proof. Richard stood, his chair scraping against expensive hardwood. She has 6 witnesses. Unless you're suggesting my daughter is a liar. Of course not, but then I suggest you interview those 6 students immediately. And depending on what they say, Madison Whitmore will be the one facing expulsion, not my daughter. Now wait just a minute, Mr. Whitmore blustered. You can't threaten to expel our daughter based on the word of a troubled child. Troubled? Richard's voice dropped to something dangerous. My daughter survived a car crash that killed her mother. She carries the physical and emotional scars of that survival every single day. And instead of receiving compassion and support from this institution, she's been subjected to cruelty and isolation by students whose parents teach them that wealth equals worth. Mr. Harrington, Principal Morrison tried to interject. I'm not finished. Richard turned to face him directly. When I enrolled Lena here, you promised me a safe, nurturing environment. You promised small class sizes and individualized attention and a community that would embrace her. Instead, I've watched my daughter become a shell of herself. Watched her stop smiling, stop engaging, stop believing she deserves to take up space in the world. He glanced at Ethan, at Sophie still holding Lena's hand, at his daughter who was crying silently but standing taller than she had in months. One stranger at a gala showed her more kindness in 5 minutes than this entire school has shown in 2 years. That should embarrass you. It certainly embarrasses me that I kept her here this long. If you're dissatisfied with Ashworth, the dean of students said stiffly, you're certainly free to enroll Lena elsewhere. Oh, I intend to. Richard pulled Lena gently to her feet. Effective immediately. You can send her records to whatever address I provide. We're done here. You can't just leave, Mrs. Whitmore protested. We have witnesses to assault. We have grounds for what? Suing a 9-year-old for defending herself against hate speech? Richard's smile was cold. Please try it. I'd love to see how that plays in the media. Wealthy family prosecutes grieving child for standing up to bullying. The headlines write themselves. He held out his hand to Ethan. Shall we? They walked out of Ashworth Academy together, two fathers and two girls, leaving behind a conference room full of sputtering administrators and furious parents. The afternoon sun hit them like a blessing as they emerged onto the pristine lawn. "That was amazing, Dad," Lena said, her voice still shaky but tinged with awe. "You really told them." "I should have told them a long time ago." Richard knelt to his daughter's level. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I thought keeping you there was protecting you. I thought money could buy you safety, but it just bought you a prettier cage." "So where am I going to go to school now?" Richard looked at Ethan. "That depends on a conversation your dad and I have been dancing around for a week now." They ended up at a park 3 blocks from Ashworth, sitting on benches while the girls played on swings that had seen better days. It was the kind of park that existed in the spaces between wealth, not fancy enough for the private school families, not run down enough to be condemned, just a normal place where normal kids played. "I've been doing research," Richard said without preamble. "Portland has excellent public schools. The housing market is reasonable compared to here. My company has an office there that needs stronger leadership. I could relocate within a month. That's fast. Fast is what we need. Every day Lena spends in this environment is another day she learns to hate herself." Richard watched his daughter push Sophie on the swing, both girls laughing. "What about you? Have you thought about it?" Ethan had thought about little else. Had spent every night since the diner sitting at his kitchen table, running numbers and weighing possibilities and trying to figure out if he was considering this because it was genuinely best for Sophie or because he was afraid of being alone. "The Grandview offered me a promotion," he said finally. "Good pay, health insurance, stability. But it's still here. Still in the city where every street corner reminds me of Miranda. Still in the apartment where her coffee mug sits in the cabinet and her garden stones line the walkway." Ethan rubbed his face. "Sometimes I think moving would be running away. Other times I think staying is just another form of running." "What does Sophie think?" "Sophie wants to be wherever Lena is. She's been planning their matching first day of school outfits for 3 days. Despite everything, Ethan smiled. "She doesn't understand the logistics of moving. She just knows her friend needs her." Kids have a way of cutting through the complexity to what actually matters. They sat in companionable silence, watching their daughters play. Around them, the park hummed with life. Teenagers on skateboards, mothers with strollers, an elderly man feeding pigeons. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that 2 men on a bench were contemplating decisions that would reshape everything. "Can I tell you something?" Richard said quietly. "After Claire died, I threw myself into work. Built the company bigger, made more money, convinced myself that financial security was how I'd protect Lena from ever being hurt again. But money can't buy safety. It can't buy healing. Sometimes it can't even buy kindness." "What changed?" "You did." Richard turned to face him. "You reminded me that the most valuable things can't be purchased. That courage looks like a waiter risking his job to dance with a child everyone else ignored. That wisdom sounds like a 6-year-old saying, 'Princesses defend each other.' I just did what felt right." "Exactly. You trusted your instincts instead of your fear, and everything changed because of it." Richard's expression held something fragile and hopeful. "I'm tired of making decisions based on fear, Ethan. I'm tired of trying to control the uncontrollable. I want to make one decision based on hope." "Moving across the country with someone you barely know, that's your hope-based decision?" "No," Richard smiled. "Believing that friendship can be found in unexpected places, that 2 broken families might help each other heal, that my daughter deserves to grow up somewhere she can just be Lena, not Richard Harrington's damaged heiress. That's hope." Ethan wanted to argue, to point out all the ways this could go wrong. The logistics of moving, the risk of leaving behind everything familiar, the possibility that they'd get to Portland and discover that geography didn't solve internal problems. But then Sophie's laugh rang out across the playground, pure and joyful, and Lena laughed with her, a sound Richard later admitted he hadn't heard in 6 months. And Ethan remembered what Miranda had said in those final lucid moments. "Don't just survive, live." "I need guarantees," he heard himself say. "Not about money or job security. I know you'd help with that, and I appreciate it. But guarantees about boundaries, about maintaining independence, about this being a friendship between equals, not charity disguised as kindness." "Fair," Richard nodded. What do you need? I pay my own rent. I buy my own groceries. If you want to help Sophie and Lena do activities together, we split the cost. Ethan met his gaze. I won't be your project, Richard. I won't be the grateful poor person you rescued. We're friends or we're nothing. Agreed. What else? We make decisions about the girls together, but we respect that we're separate families. You don't get to override my parenting, and I don't presume to tell you how to raise Lena. Fair. And if this doesn't work, if we get to Portland and realize we made a mistake, we both agree to be honest about it. No forcing something that isn't working just because we feel obligated. Richard extended his hand. Deal. Anything else? Ethan thought about it, about the weight of this decision and the impossibility of knowing if it was right. About Miranda's garden stones and Sophie's friendship bracelets, and all the small things that mattered more than logic. Yeah, one more thing. He shook Richard's hand firmly. We have to actually become friends, not just parents coordinating play dates, but real friends who talk about real things. Because Sophie and Lena are going to model their friendship on ours, and I want them to see what honest, vulnerable friendship looks like. For a moment, Richard looked surprised. Then something shifted in his expression, a wall coming down, a mask being set aside. I'd like that, he said quietly. I haven't had a real friend since Claire died. Everyone either wants something from me or treats me like I'm made of glass. It's exhausting. I haven't had a friend since Miranda died either. Miguel and Sarah are work friends, but it's not the same as someone who knows you outside your job. Ethan smiled wryly. Guess we're both pretty isolated for different reasons. Then maybe we can fix that. Together. They called the girls over, both children flushed and happy from playing. Sophie's hair had escaped its braid, and Lena had grass stains on her dress, and neither of them cared even a little bit. Lena, Sophie, Richard said seriously. Mr. Brooks and I have been talking. We're considering moving to a new city, Portland, on the West Coast. It would mean leaving everything familiar behind. New house, new school, new everything. What do you think? Would we be together? Lena asked immediately. That's the plan. Same neighborhood, same school district. Sophie looked at Ethan with her two wise eyes. Would Mommy be sad if we left? The question hit him square in the chest. No, baby. Mommy would want us to be happy. And if moving helps us be happy, she'd be the first one packing boxes. Can we bring her garden stones? Every single one. Then I vote yes. Sophie turned to Lena. What about you? Lena looked between her father and Ethan, something old and hurt warring with something new and hopeful in her expression. You promise it'll be different? That people won't just be mean in a new place? I can't promise people won't be mean sometimes, Richard said honestly. But I promise you'll be in a place where you can just be yourself. Where your dad's money doesn't define you and your scar doesn't define you. Where you get to figure out who Lena actually is. And I'll be there, Sophie added. So even if people are mean, you won't be alone. Lena was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled the friendship bracelet from her wrist, the one Sophie had made, now worn soft from constant wear. Do you know what I love about this bracelet? She said softly. It's messy and uneven and kind of falling apart. But Sophie made it because she wanted me to have something that said I matter to her. Not because I'm rich or pretty or perfect. Just because I'm me. She put it back on carefully. I want to live in a place where people see me like this bracelet sees me. Where messy and uneven is okay because it's real. Richard pulled his daughter into a hug that said everything words couldn't. Over her head, his eyes met Ethan's, and something passed between them. A recognition that they were about to step off a cliff together, trusting that they'd figure out how to fly on the way down. Portland it is, Richard said. When can you be ready to move? I need 2 weeks to give notice at the Grandview and pack up the apartment, maybe 3. Ethan's mind was already spinning with logistics. What about you? I can have the company arrange everything. Housing, movers, school enrollment. I'll handle it. Richard held up a hand before Ethan could protest. That's not charity. That's me using my resources to make this transition easier for all of us. You can pay me back by helping me figure out how to be a normal dad instead of a CEO who happens to have a kid. Deal. They shook hands again, sealing something that felt bigger than either of them fully understood. Around them, the park continued its ordinary rhythm, unaware that on this unremarkable Tuesday afternoon, two families had just decided to trust in possibility. The next 2 weeks moved with the kind of speed that made Ethan's head spin. Giving notice at the Grandview was harder than expected. Miguel actually cried, and Sarah made him promise to stay in touch. His landlord was suspiciously understanding about breaking the lease early, until Ethan realized Richard had probably paid out the remainder. He didn't have the energy to argue about it. Packing up 3 years of accumulated life was its own kind of grief. Every drawer held memories, Miranda's favorite sweater that still smelled faintly of her perfume, the coffee mug with a chip from when she'd knocked it against the sink while laughing at some joke, photo albums and birthday cards and all the small artifacts of a life that had ended too soon. "We can bring all of it," Richard said when he stopped by to help pack. He'd started doing that, showing up in jeans and a t-shirt instead of suits, helping with boxes instead of writing checks, becoming a friend instead of a benefactor. "I've rented a moving truck big enough for both our households. You're bringing your stuff too? Selling the house here, starting fresh there? Lena and I talked about it. Too many memories haunting the halls." Richard carefully wrapped one of Miranda's photo frames. "Claire's things are already in storage. I kept thinking I'd know when it was time to go through them, but it's been 2 years and I still can't." It took me 18 months to move Miranda's clothes out of the closet. Even now, I sometimes reach for her shampoo in the shower before remembering she's not here to use it. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, two widowers packing up the physical remnants of love that death had ended but not erased. "Can I ask you something?" Richard said eventually. "Do you ever feel guilty? About moving on, I mean. About being happy when they're not here to be happy with us?" "Every single day." Ethan taped up a box of books. "Sophie laughs at something, and my first instinct is to turn and share it with Miranda. Then I remember I can't, and the joy gets this edge of sadness, like nothing can ever be purely good again." "That's exactly it. The edge," sighed. Richard sat back on his heels. "Lena smiled the other day, really smiled, the kind that reaches her eyes, and my first thought was, I need to tell Claire. Then the grief hits all over again." "Does it get better?" "Everyone keeps saying it gets better. I think it gets different. The acute pain dulls to a chronic ache. You learn to carry it instead of being crushed by it." Ethan met his gaze. "But I don't think it ever fully goes away. Miranda's death is part of my story now. I can write new chapters, but I can't erase what's already written." "I'm glad you're writing new chapters." Richard's expression held genuine warmth. "I'm glad we're writing them together." The girls were inseparable during those 2 weeks. Sophie and Lena video chatted every night, making elaborate plans for their new rooms and the school they'd attend together. They created a shared journal where they drew pictures and wrote notes to their mothers, Sophie's careful printing mixing with Lena's slightly more advanced cursive. One night, Ethan found Sophie's entry and had to step out of the room to cry. "Dear Mommy," it read, "we're moving to Portland. Daddy says you would be happy about it. I think so too because Lena needs a friend and Daddy needs Mister. Richard and sometimes families are made of people who choose each other. Like you chose Daddy and Daddy chose you. I'm choosing Lena and her dad is choosing my dad, and maybe that's how love works. You pick people and you keep them. I picked you first, Mommy, but you had to go to heaven. But I think you picked Lena for me before you left, like a present that took a while to arrive. Thank you for the present. I'll take good care of her. Love, Sophie." The moving day came faster than Ethan expected and slower than he could stand. The apartment looked strange, empty, all their life packed into boxes, the walls bare of Sophie's artwork, the rooms echoing with absence. "This is really happening," he said to the empty living room. To Miranda, maybe. To himself. To the universe. "We're really leaving." Sophie found him there, sitting on the floor in the middle of nothing. She climbed into his lap without a word, fitting perfectly against his chest the way she had since she was born. "Are you sad, Daddy?" "A little. This is where we lived with Mommy. It feels like leaving her behind." "We're not leaving her." Sophie patted his cheek with the kind of certainty only children possessed. "Mommy's in here," she tapped his chest. "And here," she tapped her own. "She goes with us everywhere. That's how love works." Out of the mouths of babes, again and always. The drive to Portland took 3 days. Richard had offered to fly them out, but Ethan had insisted on driving. He needed the time to process, to let the change happen gradually instead of waking up in a new city without the journey in between. They caravanned across the country, 2 vehicles carrying 2 families toward something unknown. At night, they stopped at budget hotels where the girls shared a room, and the father sat outside talking until late, learning each other's stories in the darkness. Richard talked about building his company from nothing, about meeting Claire at a charity event and knowing within 5 minutes that he'd marry her, about the call that his wife had been in an accident, the hospital where they'd told him she was gone, the moment he'd had to explain death to a 7-year-old covered in bandages. Ethan talked about Miranda's diagnosis, the year of treatment that felt like hope, and the moment they'd learned it wasn't enough, about holding her hand as she died, about Sophie's questions he couldn't answer, about the loneliness that followed him like a shadow even in crowded rooms. "We're a mess," Richard said on the second night, somewhere in Wyoming under stars that seemed impossibly bright. 2 widowers running away to Portland with our traumatized daughters, hoping geography will fix what's broken inside us. "Yep," Ethan agreed. "Completely ridiculous." "Want to turn back?" "Not even a little bit." They laughed then, the kind of laughter that held exhaustion and hope and the recognition that sometimes the most ridiculous decisions were the most necessary ones. Portland appeared on the afternoon of the 3rd day like a promise materializing. Mountains in the distance, rivers running through the city, neighborhoods that sprawled green and alive. It looked nothing like home. Maybe that was the point. The houses Richard had rented sat on the same street, 3 doors apart, close enough for the girls to run between them, far enough for independence. Ethan's was smaller, a 2-bedroom with a backyard just big enough for Miranda's garden stones. Richard's was bigger, but not ostentatiously so, the kind of place a successful professional might live without screaming wealth. "What do you think?" Richard asked as they stood on the sidewalk, surveying their new street. Before Ethan could answer, a woman emerged from the house between theirs. She was maybe 50, with gray hair in a messy bun and gardening gloves covered in dirt. "You must be the new neighbors." She pulled off a glove to shake hands. "I'm Patricia Huang. Welcome to the neighborhood. Are these your daughters?" "I'm Sophie," Sophie announced. "And this is my friend Lena, and this is my dad, and this is Lena's dad, and we just moved here from across the country, and we're going to go to school together and be best friends forever." Patricia laughed with genuine delight. "Well, that's quite an introduction. My granddaughter Emma lives with me. She's about your age. I bet she'd love to meet you." Just like that, the girls had a 3rd friend. Just like that, Patricia was inviting them all to dinner tomorrow. Just like that, they weren't strangers in a new city, but neighbors, potential friends, people building a community from nothing. That night, after Sophie was asleep in her new room surrounded by boxes they'd unpack tomorrow, Ethan stood in his backyard and placed Miranda's garden stones in a careful circle. Each one held a memory: their first date, their wedding, Sophie's birth, the day they'd learned about the cancer, the morning Miranda had died. "We made it," he told the stones, told her memory, told the night air. "I don't know if this was the right decision, but it was a brave one. You always said I needed to be braver." The wind rustled through unfamiliar trees, carrying unfamiliar sounds. Somewhere down the street, Lena was probably placing her own memorial items, creating her own shrine to loss in a new location. And maybe that was okay. Maybe the point wasn't to leave grief behind, but to carry it forward into new contexts, to say, "This happened, it mattered, it changed me, and I'm still here. Still trying, still hoping." His phone buzzed. "Richard. The girls want a sleepover tomorrow night. Apparently Emma's invited too, and they're planning to initiate the Portland Princess Club." "Thoughts?" Ethan smiled at the screen. "Sounds perfect. I'll bring pizza." "You'll bring half the pizza. I've got the other half. Equal partners, remember? Deal." Ethan looked back at the garden stones, at the new house behind him, at the unfamiliar stars overhead. Then he went inside where his daughter slept peacefully, dreaming of new friends and fresh starts and all the possibility tomorrow held. The dance had stopped the room, but what came after? That was still being written. The Portland Princess Club's first official meeting happened on a Friday night, 2 weeks after they'd arrived. Patricia's granddaughter, Emma, turned out to be a whirlwind of energy with bright purple glasses and opinions about everything. She'd taken one look at Lena's scar and said, "That's so cool, you look like a warrior." And just like that, Lena had found another person who saw her instead of her damage. The three girls had commandeered Richard's living room, building a blanket fort that defied the laws of physics and structural engineering. Ethan and Richard sat in the kitchen, ostensibly supervising, but mostly just listening to the sound of children laughing, a sound both men had feared they might never hear from their daughters again. "Emma asked Lena about the scar," Richard said quietly, watching through the doorway as the girls draped another sheet over a precarious tower of chairs. "Just straight up. What happened to your face?" No tiptoeing, no performative politeness. "What did Lena say?" "She said car accident. My mom died." And Emma said, "That's terrible. Want to see my scar from when I fell off the monkey bars?" Richard shook his head in wonder. Just like that, it was normalized. Not ignored, not made into a tragedy, just acknowledged and moved past. Kids have a gift for that. Sophie does the same thing with Miranda's death. Adults get all weird and careful, but kids just accept it as part of our story. Ethan took a sip of coffee. "Speaking of stories, Lena starts at Riverside Elementary on Monday. You nervous?" "Terrified," Richard admitted. "What if it's Ashworth all over again? What if the kids here are just as cruel, just less polished about it?" "Then we'll handle it. Together." Ethan met his gaze. "That's the deal, remember? We don't do this alone anymore." Before Richard could respond, a crash from the living room sent both fathers running. They found Sophie tangled in a sheet, Emma laughing so hard she'd fallen over, and Lena trying valiantly to hold up a collapsing fort with one hand while reaching for her phone with the other. "I'm documenting this for posterity," Lena announced seriously, snapping a photo of the chaos. "The Great Fort Collapse of Week 2. "Week 2 of what?" Ethan asked, helping Sophie untangle herself. "Of our new lives, obviously." Lena said it like it should have been self-evident. "Emma's making a scrapbook. We're each supposed to contribute photos and drawings and stuff about starting over." "That's actually really beautiful," Richard said softly. "It was my idea," Emma announced proudly. "My mom died when I was 4. I don't remember her much, but Grandma Patricia keeps scrapbooks so I can see who she was. I figured Lena and Sophie might want that too, a record of the before and the after." The casual way she mentioned her mother's death, like it was just another fact about herself, seemed to give Lena permission. She climbed out of the fort wreckage and sat cross-legged on the floor. "Can I ask you something, Emma? About your mom?" "Sure." "Does it get easier, missing her?" Emma considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "It gets different. Some days I barely think about her. Other days I cry because I can't remember what her voice sounded like. But Grandma says that's normal. That grief isn't something you get over. It's something you learn to carry." "My dad says the same thing," Sophie chimed in, settling beside Lena. "He says Mommy lives in our hearts now," which sounds made up but also kind of true because I feel her sometimes. Like when I'm sad and I remember something she used to say. "What did your mom used to say?" Lena asked. "That being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the thing anyway." Sophie smiled. "Sophie, like how Daddy was scared to dance with you at the gala, but he did it anyway because it was right." Ethan's throat tightened. He'd never told Sophie he'd been scared that night. Kids noticed everything. "I was scared that night too," Lena admitted. "When your dad asked me to dance, I thought it was a trick, like he was going to laugh at me or people would throw things, but he just looked at me like I was normal, and then we danced and everything changed." Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I need a minute," he muttered, heading toward the back door. Ethan followed, leaving the girls to their fort reconstruction. He found Richard on the back porch, staring at the unfamiliar Portland skyline, with his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Sorry," Richard said without turning. Listening to Lena talk about that night, it just hits me sometimes. How close I came to losing her completely. Not physically, but losing who she was underneath all that pain. "But you didn't lose her." "Only because a stranger cared more about her dignity than I did." Richard's voice cracked. "I was sitting at that head table, watching people mock my daughter, and I did nothing. I told myself I was being strategic, that confronting them publicly would make it worse, but really, I was just a coward. You were a grieving father trying to protect his child in the only way you knew how. By hiding, by keeping her isolated in that fancy school where everyone whispered behind their hands instead of saying cruel things out loud? Richard turned to face him. You saw her, Ethan. One look and you saw that she needed someone to stand up for her. Why couldn't I see that? Ethan thought about all the times after Miranda died when he'd seen Sophie struggling and hadn't known how to help, when he'd worked double shifts to avoid going home to an empty house, telling himself he was providing when really he was running. Because you were too close, he said finally. When you love someone that much, when their pain is your pain, sometimes you can't see clearly. You needed an outsider's perspective. Is that what you were? An outsider? That night, yeah. I was just a waiter who saw a kid being hurt. Ethan leaned against the porch railing. But I'm not an outsider anymore, and neither are you. We're in this together now, which means when you can't see clearly, I'll tell you. And when I'm too close to my own stuff, you'll do the same. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled something from his pocket, a worn leather wallet, the kind that had seen years of use. From it, he extracted a photograph, creased and faded. This is my brother Marcus. Ethan took the photo carefully. It showed two men in military uniforms, arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the kind of confidence that came from surviving something difficult together. He died 12 years ago. Afghanistan. Richard's voice went flat in the way people's voices did when they were holding back too much emotion. IED on a routine patrol. He was 3 months from coming home. I'm sorry. He was my best friend, closer than most brothers. After he died, I threw myself into building the company, told myself it was honoring his memory, making something of the life he didn't get to live. Richard took the photo back, studying it like he was trying to memorize details he'd already memorized 1,000 times. But really I was just running, from grief, from survivor's guilt, from having to feel anything at all. Why are you telling me this? Richard carefully returned the photo to his wallet. Because Marcus carried something with him always. A challenge coin from our unit, one of those military medallions they give out. He was obsessed with it, said it kept him safe. After he died, his things were shipped home. The coin wasn't among them. Something cold settled in Ethan's stomach. Richard, the night of the gala, when you helped Lena back to our table, I noticed something on your keychain, a military challenge coin, 10th Mountain Division, same as Marcus's unit. Ethan's hand went automatically to his pocket, where his keys sat heavy and impossible. He pulled them out slowly, the coin catching the porch light. The metal was worn smooth from years of handling, the division insignia barely visible. Where did you get that? Richard's voice was carefully controlled. A soldier gave it to me. The memory rose up, vivid and terrible. 7 years ago, I was working construction on a site near the VA hospital. There was an accident, a scaffolding collapse. I pulled a guy out from under the debris, probably saved his life, though he was pretty banged up. While we were waiting for the ambulance, he kept saying he had to give me something, kept insisting. Finally pressed this coin into my hand and made me promise to keep it safe. What was his name? Ethan closed his eyes, pulling up details from a day he'd almost forgotten. He never told me. He was pretty out of it, in shock. But he had a tattoo on his forearm, a quote. Not all those who wander are lost. And he kept saying he had to get home to his brother, that his brother needed him. The silence that followed felt weighted with years of grief colliding. Marcus had that exact tattoo, Richard said quietly. And he was coming home to help me. Claire and I had just gotten married. He was going to be my best man at the delayed reception we'd planned. But he died in Afghanistan. 3 months later, yes, but before that deployment he'd been stateside for 6 months, recovering from injuries sustained in a previous tour. Richard's hands were shaking. He never mentioned an accident, never told me he'd almost died. He just kept saying he was fine, that he'd be home soon. The pieces clicked together with devastating clarity. Marcus had nearly died in that scaffolding collapse, had gone back to active duty despite his injuries, possibly before he'd fully healed. had died 3 months later in a country half a world away. I didn't know, Ethan said helplessly. If I'd known he was going back to combat, if I'd known he wasn't fully recovered. You saved his life once. You gave him 3 more months with his unit, 3 more months of purpose. Richard's eyes were wet. That's not nothing. But it wasn't enough. It never is. Richard took the coin gently from Ethan's hand, turning it over in his fingers. Do you know what these coins mean? They're given to soldiers who exemplify the unit's values. Courage, integrity, sacrifice. Marcus gave his to you because you embodied those same values. Because you saved him without thinking about the cost to yourself. I just did what anyone would do. That's exactly what you said about dancing with Lena. Richard looked up, and the expression on his face was complex beyond words. You keep doing what anyone should do, but most people don't. You keep seeing people who need help and helping them. You saved my brother. 7 years later, you saved my daughter. Do you have any idea what that means to me? Ethan didn't know what to say. The weight of coincidence felt too heavy to be random, but he didn't believe in fate. Didn't believe the universe orchestrated moments like this with purpose. Except maybe he was wrong. Maybe sometimes grief and loss and random chance aligned in ways that created meaning from chaos. I think Marcus would be glad, Richard continued, that the man who saved him once ended up saving his niece too, that you're in our lives now, that we're not doing this alone anymore. He handed the coin back to Ethan. Keep it, it's yours. But know that every time you look at it, you're not just remembering a stranger you saved, you're remembering my brother, Lena's uncle, the man who would have loved her fiercely and protected her completely if he'd lived to meet her. The weight of the coin felt different now. Not just metal and memory, but connection. The invisible threads that tied people together across time and tragedy and random moments of courage. Did you know? Ethan had to ask. At the gala, did you see the coin and recognize it? Not until later. That night, I was too overwhelmed by watching my daughter smile for the first time in months. But afterward, when I couldn't sleep, I kept replaying the moment you asked her to dance, kept trying to figure out why a stranger would risk so much for someone he didn't know. Richard smiled sadly. Then I remembered Marcus saying the same thing about the construction worker who saved him. He didn't even know me, but he risked his life anyway. I thought it was just another story about human kindness. I never imagined that it was the same person. That the universe was giving me a chance to repay a debt I didn't even know I owed. From inside, the girls' laughter drifted through the open window. Sophie was teaching Emma the dragon dance while Lena documented everything with her phone, all 3 of them unselfconscious and joyful. I don't think the universe works like that, Ethan said. I don't think we're meant to repay debts or balance cosmic scales. I think sometimes good people find each other by accident and they choose to stay together on purpose. Is that what we're doing? Choosing to stay together? Yeah, I think it is. Ethan pocketed the coin. Your brother saved my life too, you know. Not physically, but spiritually. After Miranda died, I was drowning, working myself to death, barely present for Sophie, just going through the motions. Then the gala happened and everything shifted. You and Lena reminded me that connection matters, that being there for people matters. So we saved each other. I guess we did. They stood in comfortable silence, 2 men bound together by coincidence and choice, and the invisible legacy of someone they'd both loved and lost. Inside, Patricia's voice joined the chaos. I brought cookies. And by brought, I mean I baked them 30 seconds ago, and they're probably going to burn a hole through the plate, so everyone be careful. That's our cue, Richard said. Can't let Patricia's dangerous baking go unsupervised. They returned to find the living room transformed into what the girls called the Memory Museum. Photographs and drawings covered every surface, some old, some new. Claire and Marcus smiled from frames the girls had decorated with markers and stickers. Miranda's garden stones had been carefully photographed and printed, each image labeled with the memory it represented. We decided to make a tribute, Lena explained, to all the people who can't be here but who made us who we are. Is that okay? Richard's voice failed him. He just nodded, pulling Lena into a hug that said everything words couldn't. Ethan found himself standing in front of a drawing Sophie had made. It showed 5 figures, 2 adults, 3 children. Above them, 3 figures drawn in lighter colors, translucent like ghosts. The title, in Sophie's careful printing, Our Family, the Ones Here and the Ones Watching. Do you like it, Daddy? Sophie appeared at his elbow. I wanted to show that Mommy and Lena's mommy and Mr. Marcus are still part of our family, even though they're in heaven. Mr. Marcus? Lena's dad told us about his brother while you were outside. He sounded really nice, like someone who would have been a good uncle. Sophie studied her drawing critically. I gave him a superhero cape because Lena said he was a soldier, and soldiers are basically superheroes. That's exactly right, baby. Patricia came to stand beside them, offering Ethan a cookie that was indeed dangerously hot. The girls asked me about my daughter earlier, about Emma's mom. I told them she'd be proud of the young woman Emma's becoming, that watching from heaven doesn't mean leaving us alone. You believe that? Ethan asked. That they're watching? I believe love doesn't end just because life does. Patricia smiled. And I believe these three girls found each other for a reason. They're going to do something special together. I can feel it. Monday morning arrived with the kind of anxiety that made Ethan's coffee taste like battery acid. Sophie and Lena were starting at Riverside Elementary, the first day at a school where nobody knew them, where they'd have to navigate new social dynamics and prove themselves all over again. What if they're mean again? Lena asked for the 5th time as Richard braided her hair. She'd chosen to wear it in a style that partially covered her scar, not hiding it exactly, but not advertising it either. Then you have Sophie, Richard reminded her, and Emma, and me and Ethan are both on the emergency contact list. One call and we're there. But what if... Lena, Richard turned her to face him. You're going to be fine. Better than fine. You're smart and kind and brave as hell. Any kid who can't see that isn't worth your time. In Ethan's house 3 doors down, a similar conversation was happening. I'm worried about Lena, Sophie announced, struggling with her shoelaces. What if the kids ask about her scar and she gets sad? Then you'll be there to remind her she's more than her scar. Ethan helped with the laces. That's what friends do. What if I say the wrong thing? Baby, there's no script for this. You just love her and stand by her and trust that's enough. Is it? Enough, I mean? Ethan thought about Marcus and the challenge coin, about one stranger's choice to help another, and how it had rippled forward through 7 years to bring 2 families together. Yeah, he said. Love is always enough. They walked to school together, 2 fathers, 3 girls, all of them nervous in different ways. Riverside Elementary was bigger than Ethan had expected, sprawling across several buildings with a playground that looked like it had been designed by someone who actually remembered being a child. The principal, Dr. Sarah Martinez, met them in the main office with a warmth that felt genuine rather than performative. Welcome! You must be Lena and Sophie. We're so excited to have you. And Emma, good to see you back. Did you have a good summer? The best, Emma announced. I got 2 new best friends. Dr. Martinez smiled. I heard. Patricia couldn't stop talking about it. She turned to the fathers. I want you both to know that Riverside takes bullying very seriously. We have a zero-tolerance policy, and we work hard to create an inclusive environment where every student feels safe. Lena has some concerns, Richard said carefully, based on experiences at her previous school. I read her file. Dr. Martinez's expression turned serious. I'm sorry she went through that, but I promise you, Riverside is different. Our teachers are trained in trauma-informed education, and we have a robust peer mediation program. If any issues arise, we address them immediately. She knelt to Lena's level. I notice you have a scar on your face. Would you prefer that your teachers mention it proactively to the class, or would you rather handle questions as they come up? Lena looked startled to be asked. I don't know. What do most kids do? There's no most kids. There's just you, and what makes you comfortable. Dr. Martinez's tone was patient. Some students prefer when we address visible differences right away, so they don't have to deal with whispers and staring. Others would rather it not be made into a big deal. Both choices are valid. Lena looked at Sophie, who nodded encouragingly, then at Emma, who gave her a thumbs up. Finally at her father, who smiled with obvious pride. I want to tell them myself, Lena said. Not like an announcement or anything, just if someone asks, I want to be the one to tell my story. That's very brave. I think that's a great choice. Dr. Martinez stood. Your teacher, Mrs. Chen, is wonderful. She'll make sure you feel supported. The coincidence of the name made Ethan smile. Maybe it was a sign, or maybe the universe just had a limited selection of surnames and a sense of humor. The classroom was bright and welcoming, with student artwork covering every available surface and beanbag chairs in a reading corner. Mrs. Chen, a different Mrs. Chen, younger and more energetic than Sophie's babysitter, greeted them with enthusiasm. You must be our new students. Come in, come in. We were just about to start sharing about our summers. The other students watched with the frank curiosity of second graders as Sophie, Lena, and Emma found seats together. Ethan wanted to stay, to protect them from potential cruelty, but Richard's hand on his shoulder reminded him that hovering would only make things worse. They've got this, Richard murmured. They retreated to the hallway, watching through the classroom door as Mrs. Chen organized the kids into a circle for sharing time. My name is Sophie Brooks, Sophie announced when it was her turn. I moved here from across the country with my dad. My mom died when I was little, and this is my first time starting completely over. I'm kind of scared, but also excited. And this is my best friend Lena, and she's the bravest person I know. Lena went next, her voice steady despite the tremor Ethan could see in her hands. I'm Lena Harrington. I moved here with my dad, too. 2 years ago, I was in a car accident. My mom died, and I got this scar. She touched her face deliberately. Some kids at my old school were mean about it. I'm hoping the kids here will be nicer. The honesty was breathtaking. No euphemisms, no hiding, just truth delivered with quiet courage. A boy in the front raised his hand. Did the accident hurt? Yeah, a lot. Does it still hurt? Sometimes, mostly just when people stare or whisper about it. Oh. The boy considered this. I'll try not to stare then, but it looks kind of cool like you fought a dragon or something. That's exactly what I said, Emma interjected. I told her she looks like a warrior. What's a warrior? Another student asked. And just like that, the conversation shifted. The kids started sharing their own scars and stories. A broken arm from falling off a bike, a burn from touching a hot stove, a scar from surgery when they were born early. By the time Mrs. Chen gently redirected them to the actual summer sharing, Lena's scar was just one story among many. Out in the hallway, Richard's shoulders finally relaxed. They're going to be okay. Yeah, Ethan agreed. They really are. They left the school together, two fathers trusting that their daughters could handle what came next. The morning stretched ahead, empty hours before pickup time, the strange freedom of not having to work double shifts or manage crisis after crisis. Coffee? Richard suggested. God, yes. They found a local place 3 blocks from the school, the kind of coffee shop that Portland seemed to specialize in. Exposed brick, local art on the walls, a chalkboard menu that featured drinks Ethan had never heard of. He ordered a plain black coffee and felt like a dinosaur when the barista looked disappointed. So, Richard said once they were settled at a corner table, what do we do now? What do you mean? We spent the last month focused on moving, getting settled, getting the girls enrolled. Now that's done. We have to figure out what our actual lives look like here. Ethan hadn't thought that far ahead. I need to find work. Can't live off savings forever. I could use someone at the Portland office. Someone who understands what actually matters instead of just quarterly profits. Richard, I know. Equal partners, no charity. Richard held up his hands. But this isn't charity. It's a genuine job offer. I need someone to help manage our community outreach programs, coordinate with local organizations, make sure we're actually making a difference instead of just writing checks. You're good with people. You understand what it means to struggle. You'd be perfect. But I don't have a college degree. I've been working construction and hotel jobs for 15 years. And I'd trade every Harvard MBA in my building for one person with real-world experience and actual empathy. Richard leaned forward. Think about it. No pressure. But the offer stands. Before Ethan could respond, his phone rang. The school. His heart jumped into his throat. Mr. Brooks? This is Dr. Martinez. Everything's fine, she said immediately. But we have a situation with Sophie and Lena. Can you and Mr. Harrington come back to the school? They made it in record time, both fathers preparing for the worst. But when they arrived at the principal's office, They found their daughters sitting with a third-grade boy, all three children looking guilty but not hurt. "What happened?" Richard demanded. Dr. Martinez gestured for everyone to sit. During recess, this young man, Tyler, was teasing another student about his glasses. Sophie and Lena intervened, rather forcefully. "Define forcefully," Ethan said carefully. "They told Tyler that his behavior was unacceptable," Dr. Martinez explained, and when he wouldn't stop, they organized the entire second-grade class to ignore him. Complete social isolation until he apologized. Richard blinked. "That's actually kind of brilliant." "It's also a form of bullying," Dr. Martinez said firmly. "Even if the intention was good, we don't fight cruelty with cruelty." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "But he was being mean. Someone had to stop him." "And someone did. You did." Dr. Martinez's tone softened. "But there's a right way and a wrong way to stand up for people. The right way is to tell a teacher or to defend the person directly. The wrong way is to organize a group punishment. That just creates a different kind of hurt." "I'm sorry," Lena said quietly. "We just wanted to help." "I know, and your hearts were in the right place." Dr. Martinez looked at the fathers. "I'm not suspending anyone, but I'm asking you to talk with your daughters about appropriate ways to handle conflicts. And Tyler," she turned to the boy, "you're going to apologize to Marcus for teasing him, and you're going to spend recess tomorrow helping Mrs. Chen organize the classroom library." After Tyler left, chastened and apologetic, Dr. Martinez smiled at Sophie and Lena. "You girls have strong justice instincts. That's good. We need people who stand up for others, but we also need to make sure our methods don't cause harm. Understand?" Both girls nodded. "Good. Now go on back to class. And Sophie, Lena, I'm glad you're part of our Riverside family." In the car on the way home, Ethan caught Sophie's eye in the rearview mirror. "Want to talk about it?" Tyler was calling Marcus Four Eyes and saying he looked stupid. Nobody was doing anything. They were all just watching. Sophie's voice wavered. "I thought about how nobody helped Lena at her old school, and I got mad. So we helped. By making everyone ignore him. It worked. He apologized. But how do you think Tyler felt, being shut out by everyone?" Sophie was quiet for a moment. "Probably how Lena felt when everyone shut her out." "Exactly." Ethan pulled into their driveway. "What you did came from a good place, baby. But Dr. Martinez is right. We can't fight cruelty with cruelty. We have to be better than the people who hurt us." "That's hard." "Yeah, the best things usually are." That evening, all three families gathered at Patricia's for dinner, an impromptu tradition they'd started without really planning it. As they crowded around her dining room table, passing plates of Patricia's famous lasagna and listening to the girls recount their first day in exhaustive detail, Ethan felt something he'd almost forgotten. Contentment. Not happiness exactly. Grief still lived in his chest like a permanent resident, but the sharp edges had dulled. The constant ache had eased to something bearable. "You look thoughtful," Patricia observed, refilling his water glass. "Just thinking about how much has changed in a month. And how much has stayed the same." "That too." Patricia glanced at Richard, who was helping Lena cut her lasagna while simultaneously trying to stop Emma from feeding half her dinner to the ancient cat that had wandered in from somewhere. "You've built something good here, all of you together. We're trying. That's all any of us can do." Patricia smiled. "Try, and keep showing up, and trust that love compounds. You keep putting it out there, and eventually it comes back multiplied." Later, after dinner and dishes and extended goodbyes, Ethan and Richard stood on the sidewalk between their houses while the girls raced ahead, still high on sugar and excitement. "Thank you," Richard said quietly. "For what?" "For taking a chance on this. On us." Richard looked at his house, at the light spilling from the windows where Lena was visible doing homework at the kitchen table. "A month ago, I didn't know if she'd ever smile again. Now she's organizing rebellions on the playground. Probably not the outcome we were hoping for." "Are you kidding? It's exactly what I was hoping for. She stood up for someone. She saw injustice, and she acted." Richard's eyes shone. "Marcus would have loved her, would have been so proud of who she's becoming. He'd be proud of you too, for getting her here, for giving her a chance to be more than her grief. We gave each other that chance. Richard extended his hand. Partners? Ethan shook it firmly. Partners. As he walked toward his own house, where Sophie was waiting with a million more stories about her day, Ethan felt the challenge coin press against his leg through his pocket. Marcus had given it to him 7 years ago, a gift from a dying man to the stranger who'd saved him. Now it felt like a promise kept. Not all those who wander are lost. Sometimes they're just finding their way home by an unexpected route. 3 months into their Portland life, Ethan woke to find Sophie standing beside his bed at 6 in the morning, already dressed in her school clothes with her backpack on. Baby, it's Saturday. No school today. I know, but today's the day. Sophie bounced on her toes with barely contained excitement. The community center thing, remember? You said we could go watch Lena and Emma perform. Right. The talent show fundraiser. Lena had been practicing her art presentation for weeks, and Emma was doing some kind of interpretive dance that Patricia had described as enthusiastically chaotic. The community center was raising money for grief counseling programs, free therapy for kids who'd lost parents. Richard had volunteered to help organize it. Then he'd somehow talked Ethan into co-chairing the event, which had led to late nights planning logistics and early mornings coordinating volunteers. Somewhere in the chaos of folding chairs and donation tables, they'd stopped being two guys thrown together by circumstance and become actual friends. Okay, let me get coffee first. Ethan stumbled toward the kitchen, where he found a note on the counter in Richard's handwriting. Couldn't sleep. Went to the center early to set up. Bring donuts. The chocolate ones, not the healthy fruit ones Patricia keeps trying to force on us. See you at 8. Ethan smiled. 3 months ago, Richard Harrington had been a billionaire CEO who probably had assistants to write his grocery lists. Now he was leaving notes about donut preferences and setting up folding chairs at a community center in a neighborhood that had never heard of him. They arrived at the center at 8:15, armed with 2 boxes of donuts and Sophie's endless enthusiasm. The parking lot was already half full, families trickling in, volunteers unloading supplies, kids running around with the kind of energy that only happened on Saturday mornings. Inside, Richard was arguing good-naturedly with Patricia about table placement, while Emma and Lena hung art pieces on the walls. The girls had created a memorial gallery, drawings and paintings by children who'd lost parents, each piece labeled with the artist's name and who they were remembering. Daddy, look! Sophie dragged Ethan toward the display. Lena made this one for her mom, and Emma made this one, and I made this one for Mommy. Do you like it? The painting showed a woman with Miranda's smile, surrounded by flowers and sunshine. Above her, in Sophie's careful lettering, my mom taught me that love doesn't end. It just changes shape. It's perfect, baby. Ethan's voice came out rough. Mr. Brooks? A soft voice behind him. He turned to find a woman in her mid-30s holding the hand of a girl about Sophie's age. I'm Jennifer Morrison. This is my daughter, Kayla. We saw the flyer for today's event and, well, Kayla's father passed away 6 months ago. We've been struggling to find the right support. I'm sorry for your loss. Ethan knelt to Kayla's level. My wife died 3 years ago. It's really hard, isn't it? Kayla nodded, not quite meeting his eyes. Would you like to meet my daughter Sophie and her friends Lena and Emma? They all understand what you're going through. Within minutes, the girls had absorbed Kayla into their group like it was the most natural thing in the world. Jennifer watched with tears in her eyes as her daughter smiled for what looked like the first time in months. Thank you, Jennifer whispered. You don't know how much this means? Actually, Ethan said, I do. Someone did this for my daughter once. Saw her when everyone else was looking away. Changed everything. By 9 o'clock, the community center was packed. Families filled every chair, kids crowded around the memorial gallery, and volunteers rushed between the donation table and the refreshment station. Richard had somehow convinced a local news crew to cover the event, and now a reporter was interviewing Patricia about the grief counseling program. We serve about 40 families a year, Patricia was saying, but the need is so much greater. We turn away dozens of people because we don't have the funding or the staff. Events like today help, but what we really need is sustainable support. A way to help every child who's grieving, not just the ones who happen to find us. The reporter turned to Richard. Mr. Harrington, I understand you've been instrumental in organizing this fundraiser. What drew you to this cause? Richard glanced at Lena, who was helping a smaller child hang their artwork. My daughter lost her mother 2 years ago. We had access to the best therapist money could buy, but what actually helped her heal was finding other kids who understood. Community matters more than credentials. Connection matters more than cash. And yet you're trying to raise cash today. Because not everyone has access to what my daughter had. Not everyone can afford private therapy or specialized programs. Grief shouldn't be something only the wealthy can process properly. Richard's expression intensified. Every child deserves support. Every family deserves resources. That's what we're working toward. Ethan watched from the sidelines, impressed despite himself. 3 months ago, Richard had been drowning in grief and guilt, hiding behind corporate success because he didn't know how else to protect his daughter. Now he was advocating publicly for something that mattered, using his platform for more than profit. The talent show started at 10. Kids performed with varying degrees of skill and maximum enthusiasm. Off-key songs, wobbly gymnastics routines, magic tricks that didn't quite work. The audience applauded everything with equal fervor because this wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up. When Lena's turn came, she walked to the front with visible nervousness. Her art presentation was displayed on easels, a series of paintings showing her journey through grief. The first was dark, all blacks and grays, a small figure huddled in shadows. Each subsequent painting grew lighter, brighter, until the final piece showed a girl standing in sunshine, her scar visible but no longer defining her. "These are my feelings," Lena said, her voice quiet but steady. "After my mom died. At first, everything was dark. I couldn't see anything good. Then slowly, little bits of light started coming back. People who were kind. Friends who understood. My dad who never gave up on me." She pointed to the final painting. "This is me now. I'm not all better. I still miss my mom every single day. But I'm not lost in the dark anymore. And if someone else is lost right now, I want them to know the light comes back. Maybe not all at once, but it comes back." The audience sat in absolute silence. Then someone started clapping, and it spread like wildfire until everyone was on their feet. Richard's face was wet with tears. Patricia was openly sobbing. Even the news reporter had to wipe her eyes. Sophie grabbed Ethan's hand. "That's what you did, Daddy. You brought the light back for Lena." "No, baby. Lena brought her own light back. I just reminded her it was there." Emma's interpretive dance was next, and it was exactly as enthusiastically chaotic as promised. She leaped and spun and crashed into the piano twice, while Patricia tried very hard not to laugh. The performance ended with Emma in a dramatic heap on the floor, breathing hard and grinning. "That was about butterflies," she announced, "how they have to break out of their cocoons to fly. It's a metaphor." The applause was thunderous. After the performances, families mingled around the donation table and refreshment station. Ethan found himself in conversation after conversation, parents sharing their stories, kids finding common ground in their grief, volunteers signing up to help with the counseling program. "Ethan Brooks?" An older man approached, extending his hand. "Tom Richardson. I'm on the board of the Riverside Community Foundation. We fund nonprofit programs throughout the city." "Nice to meet you. I wanted to talk to you about what you've built here. This event, this community response, it's exactly the kind of grassroots organizing we look for." Tom pulled out a business card. "The foundation has a grant opportunity coming up, $50,000 for programs that address underserved needs. I think your grief counseling expansion would be a perfect fit." Ethan stared at the card. "I didn't build this. Patricia runs the program. Richard organized the fundraiser. I just helped set up chairs." "From what I've observed, you did considerably more than that." Tom smiled. "The way you connect with people, make them feel seen and heard, that's a rare skill. And it's exactly what this community needs. Think about applying for the grant. I'd be happy to help with the application." After Tom left, Richard appeared at Ethan's elbow. "Did he just offer you $50,000? "He offered the program $50,000. If we apply and get selected." Ethan shook his head. "This is crazy. 3 months ago, I was a waiter. Now I'm supposed to write grant applications? 3 months ago, you were a waiter who saw someone in need and helped them. Now you're doing the same thing on a bigger scale. Richard clapped his shoulder. You're good at this, Ethan. Helping people, building community, making connections that matter. Don't underestimate that. I don't have experience. You have something better than experience. You have authenticity. You understand what it means to struggle because you've lived it. Richard's expression turned serious. Remember when I offered you that job at my company? The offer still stands. Community Outreach Coordinator. You'd work with programs like this, help allocate resources where they actually make a difference. And yes, before you ask, it comes with a real salary and benefits and everything. Richard, equal partners, I know. This isn't charity. It's me recognizing talent when I see it and trying to put it to good use. Richard pulled out his own business card, writing a number on the back. That's the salary, market rate for the position. No special favors, no pity hiring, just a legitimate job offer based on your actual skills. Ethan looked at the number and nearly dropped the card. It was more than he'd made in his best year working double shifts. Think about it, Richard said. No pressure, but Portland needs more people like you. People who give a damn about more than their own success. Before Ethan could respond, a commotion erupted near the entrance. David Masters, the drunk man from the gala, the one Richard had fired, stood in the doorway with a reporter and a cameraman. There he is! David pointed at Richard with theatrical fury. The man who destroyed my career over one mistake, who used his money and power to blacklist me from every company in our industry. The room went quiet. Richard's expression turned to stone. Mr. Masters, the reporter said, clearly eating this up. You claim Mr. Harrington's actions were unjust. Can you elaborate? I made one comment at a private event, one comment about his daughter's appearance, and for that he cost me my job, my reputation, my livelihood. David's performance was practiced, polished. This man talks about helping the community, but he destroys anyone who crosses him. He's a hypocrite and a bully. Is this true, Mr. Harrington? The reporter turned her microphone toward Richard. Yes. Richard's voice carried clearly through the silent room. I fired Mr. Masters. I also contacted my colleagues in the industry and told them exactly why. Would you like to know what he said that warranted such consequences? Please, enlighten us. David's smirk suggested he thought he'd already won. He called my 9-year-old daughter a freak. He mocked her for surviving a car crash that killed her mother. He suggested that children with visible scars should be kept hidden from public view so as not to disturb people like him. Richard took a step forward. And when a waiter, Mr. Brooks over there, asked my daughter to dance, treating her with the basic human dignity Mr. Masters couldn't muster, he threw a drink and demanded the waiter be fired for making him uncomfortable. The reporter's expression shifted. Is this accurate, Mr. Masters? I was drunk. I didn't mean... You meant exactly what you said. Lena's voice cut through the noise. She walked toward David with her head high, Sophie and Emma flanking her like guards. You said my mom deserved to die because she had a daughter like me in the car. You said I was better off dead. David's face went pale. I never... You did. And you know what? You were wrong. Lena stopped 3 feet from him. My mom didn't deserve to die. I don't deserve to be hidden away. And you don't deserve to play victim when you're the one who was cruel. Lena, Richard started forward. It's okay, Dad. I've got this. Lena turned to the camera. My name is Lena Harrington. I have a scar on my face from the accident that killed my mom. Some people think that makes me less than them. They stare, they whisper, they make jokes. But you know what I learned? Their cruelty says everything about them and nothing about me. She touched her scar deliberately. This mark tells a story about surviving something terrible, about being strong enough to keep going when everything hurt, about learning that real beauty has nothing to do with perfect skin. And if Mr. Masters can't see that, if he can't understand why his words were wrong, then he's the one who's damaged, not me. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Sophie stepped forward, taking Lena's hand. My name is Sophie Brooks. My mom died too. And Lena's the bravest person I know. Anyone who can't see that is just blind. Emma joined them, completing the triangle. I'm Emma Huang. My mom died when I was 4. And these are my best friends. They're not freaks. They're warriors. And warriors protect each other. The three girls stood together, hands linked, facing down a grown man who'd tried to make them feel small. Around them, the community center erupted in applause. David looked at the reporter, at the camera, at the crowd that was clearly not on his side. I didn't come here to... You came here to play victim, Richard said quietly. To paint yourself as the injured party, and me as the villain. But the truth is simpler than that. You were cruel to a child. I held you accountable. Those are the facts. One mistake shouldn't define my entire life. You're absolutely right. Richard's expression softened slightly. One mistake shouldn't define anyone, which is why Lena gets to be more than her scar, and Sophie gets to be more than her grief, and Emma gets to be more than her loss. They get to define themselves. He took a breath. But accountability matters too. You don't get to cause harm and then claim victimhood when there are consequences. That's not how growth works. David stood there, deflating visibly. The reporter had already lost interest, her cameraman packing up equipment. Whatever story David had hoped to create, it had backfired spectacularly. I'm sorry, he said finally, the words barely audible. To Lena, to all of you. I was angry about losing my job and I took it out on people who didn't deserve it. Apology accepted, Lena said. But you need to do better. Not just say sorry, but actually be better. David nodded and left, shoulders hunched, the fight gone out of him. The moment he was gone, the room exhaled collectively. Well, Patricia said into the silence, that was dramatic. Who wants more donuts? The laughter that followed was relieved and cathartic. The event continued, though with an added energy. People had witnessed something powerful. 3 children standing up to an adult bully with more courage than most grown people could muster. By the time the fundraiser ended at 2 o'clock, they'd raised $8,000 for the counseling program. More importantly, they'd connected dozens of families who'd been struggling in isolation, creating a network of support that would outlast any single event. You did something special today, Tom Richardson said as he was leaving. Think about that grant. This community needs what you're building here. After the cleanup was done and the center was locked up, the 3 families ended up at Richard's house for an impromptu dinner. Ethan had stopped being surprised by these gatherings. They happened organically now, like breathing. While the girls played in the backyard and Patricia dozed on the couch, the fathers found themselves on the deck with beers and the comfortable silence of people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. Lena was incredible today, Ethan said finally. Standing up to David like that? I don't think I could have done that at her age. She learned it from you, from that night at the gala when you showed her that courage looks like acting even when you're scared. She learned it from herself. I just gave her permission to use what was already there. Richard took a long drink. I've been thinking about the job offer, about whether I'm overstepping by pushing it. And I realized I'm not offering it because I pity you, or because I owe you something. I'm offering it because I genuinely think you'd be exceptional at it. Because watching you today, seeing how you connected with those families, helped them feel less alone. That's what community outreach should look like. Ethan had been thinking about it too, about the challenge coin in his pocket and Marcus's sacrifice and the invisible threads that connected all their stories. Can I ask you something? About Marcus? Anything. What did he want to do? After the military, I mean. Did he have plans? Richard smiled sadly. He wanted to work with veterans, help guys transition back to civilian life, connect them with resources, make sure they didn't fall through the cracks. He paused. Kind of exactly what you'd be doing with this job, just with a different population. The coincidence felt almost too perfect, but maybe that was the point. Maybe life didn't deal in random chance as much as Ethan wanted to believe. Maybe sometimes the universe orchestrated moments where the past informed the future in ways that honored what had been lost. Okay, Ethan heard himself say. I'll take the job, on 2 conditions. Name them. 1, we apply for that grant together. Not just me, not just your company. A real partnership where we're both invested. Done. And 2, we figure out how to make the counseling program sustainable long-term. Not just one-time fundraisers, but something that can help every kid who needs it. Something that would make Marcus proud. Richard extended his hand. Deal. They shook on it as the sun set over Portland, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. In the backyard, the girls' laughter rang out. 3 children who'd learned that grief didn't have to isolate them, that scars told stories of survival, that family could be chosen as easily as inherited. "You know what the crazy thing is?" Richard said. "If Claire hadn't died, if Lena hadn't been in that accident, if you hadn't been working the gala that night, we never would have met. Our daughters never would have found each other. All this," he gestured at the house, the backyard, the life they'd built, "never would have existed." "Are you saying something good came from tragedy?" "No, nothing good about losing the people we love." Richard's voice was firm. "But I'm saying we get to decide what we do with the aftermath. We can let it destroy us, or we can build something meaningful from the ruins." Miranda used to say something similar, that grief was just love with nowhere to go, so we had to find new places to put it. "Smart woman." "The smartest," Ethan smiled. "She would have liked you, would have appreciated what you're doing for Sophie. Claire would have loved Lena's friendship with your daughter. She always wanted Lena to have siblings." Richard's eyes glistened. "Guess in a way, she got her wish." They sat in companionable silence, 2 widowers watching their daughters play, carrying their grief and their hope in equal measure. The past year had taught them both that healing wasn't linear, that progress came in fits and starts, that some days were harder than others despite all the forward momentum. But it had also taught them that connection mattered, that choosing to show up for each other day after day made the unbearable bearable, that family could be built from friendship and friendship could be forged from tragedy. "Daddy," Sophie called from the backyard, "come see what we made." The girls had constructed an elaborate memorial garden using rocks and flowers from Richard's landscaping. At the center, they'd placed photographs of Miranda, Claire, and Marcus, surrounded by handwritten notes. "We decided to make a place where all our people could be together," Lena explained. "So when we miss them, we have somewhere to go." Emma added, "And we each wrote something we learned from them. Want to read them?" The notes were simple but profound. Lena had written, "Mom taught me that being kind matters more than being perfect." Emma said, "My mom showed me that love doesn't end when life does." Sophie's read, "Mommy said being brave means being scared and doing it anyway." "There's one more," Lena said shyly, pointing to a 4th note. "We wrote it together, for Uncle Marcus, even though we never met him." Richard picked up the note with shaking hands. "Uncle Marcus, thank you for saving Mr. Brooks so he could save Lena so our families could find each other. We'll take care of each other like you took care of your soldiers. That's a promise." He couldn't speak, could barely breathe around the emotion clogging his throat. Ethan put a hand on his shoulder, and they stood there together while their daughters waited patiently for the fathers to pull themselves together. "Marcus would have loved this," Richard managed finally. "Would have loved all of you. Thank you for honoring him." "He's part of our family," Sophie said simply. "Even the people we never met can be family if they helped make us who we are." Out of the mouths of babes, again and always and forever. That night, after Sophie was asleep and the house was quiet, Ethan sat at his kitchen table with a pen and paper. He'd been thinking about Tom's grant opportunity, about the job Richard had offered, about all the ways his life had changed in 4 short months. He started writing. Not an application yet, just thoughts, ideas about what grief counseling could look like if it was truly accessible to everyone. How to create community for the isolated. How to honor loss while building toward hope. The words flowed easier than expected, informed by his own experience and the stories he'd heard today. By 3 in the morning, he had the outline of something real, something that could help hundreds of families instead of just a few. His phone buzzed. Richard, apparently also awake. "Can't sleep. Keep thinking about the grant, about what we could build together, about how Marcus would have done this exact thing if he'd lived." "I'm writing the application now," Ethan typed back. "Want to help? Be there in 5 minutes." They worked until dawn, 2 fathers hunched over laptops and coffee, crafting a vision for comprehensive grief support. Counseling for kids, support groups for parents, peer mentoring programs, art therapy, memorial services. Everything they'd learned helped, everything they wished they'd had. "This is good," Richard said as the sun started rising. "Really good. We might actually have a shot at this." Even if we don't get the grant, we can start smaller, scale up as we grow. Ethan rubbed his eyes. I've been poor before. I know how to make a dollar stretch. And I know how to leverage resources and build partnerships. Richard smiled. See, equal partners, different strengths, same goal. They submitted the application 3 weeks later. In the meantime, Ethan started his new job at Harrington Industries, discovering that he actually loved coordinating community programs. Richard had been right. His ability to connect with people, to see what they needed rather than what looked good on paper, made him excellent at identifying worthy causes and building genuine relationships. The girls thrived at Riverside Elementary. Lena's confidence grew daily, her smile coming easier, her scar just another part of her rather than something to hide. Sophie made friends beyond just Lena and Emma, though those two remained her closest confidants. They were inseparable, the Portland Princess Club, defenders of the bullied, organizers of playground justice, occasionally still overstepping and requiring gentle correction. 8 weeks after submitting the grant application, Tom Richardson called. Congratulations, he said without preamble. The foundation board voted unanimously. $50,000 for the grief counseling expansion, with potential for renewal after the first year if outcomes are strong. Ethan had to sit down. We got it? We actually got it? Your application was the strongest we've seen in years, personal, practical, and scalable. When can you start implementation? He called Richard immediately, who whooped so loudly Lena came running to make sure her father was okay. We did it! Richard was laughing and crying simultaneously. We actually did it! They celebrated that night at Patricia's. The 3 families and half the neighborhood crammed into her living room. Someone brought champagne. Someone else brought a cake with congratulations, spelled wrong in blue frosting. It was chaotic and loud and perfect. Speech, Patricia called out, and the room took up the chant. Speech, speech. Ethan and Richard looked at each other, then stood together. 4 months ago, Ethan began, I was a waiter working double shifts and barely holding it together. My daughter was grieving her mother, and I had no idea how to help her. I felt alone and overwhelmed and like I was failing at the most important job I'd ever have. Richard picked up the thread. 4 months ago, my daughter was being bullied mercilessly at a school I thought was protecting her. I had all the money in the world and no idea how to make her happy. I felt helpless and angry and desperate. Then one night, Ethan continued, I made a choice. I asked a lonely little girl to dance even though it scared me and could have cost me my job. And everything changed. But that choice, Richard said, led to a friendship, then to a move across the country, then to this community, this program, this moment, all because one person decided that kindness mattered more than comfort. They raised their glasses. So here's to the choices we make when no one's watching, to the courage it takes to see someone who's hurting and choose to help, to the communities we build from shared grief and stubborn hope, and to the people we've lost, who taught us what love looks like even in absence. To love, the room chorused. And to new beginnings, Sophie added, standing on a chair so everyone could see her. To families that we choose, and friends who become family, and dads who dance with princesses even when they're scared. The laughter and applause lasted well into the night. A year later, the grief counseling program was serving 90 families across Portland. They'd hired 2 full-time counselors, established weekly support groups, and created a peer mentoring system where older kids who'd lost parents helped younger ones navigate their grief. The foundation had renewed their grant and increased the funding. Ethan had been promoted to Director of Community Programs at Harrington Industries, where he oversaw partnerships with dozens of local organizations. Richard had stepped back from day-to-day operations to focus on meaningful work, using his business expertise to help nonprofits scale sustainably. But more than the professional success, they'd built something real. A community of families supporting each other through loss. A network of children who understood that grief didn't make them weird or broken. A safe place where people could be honest about their pain without judgment. On the 1-year anniversary of their move to Portland, they gathered at the community center for a celebration. The memorial gallery had grown to cover 3 walls, filled with artwork from children processing loss. The grief counseling program had its own dedicated space, warm and welcoming and always full. Lena stood at a microphone preparing to speak at the event. She'd grown taller, more confident, her scar now just part of her face rather than its defining feature. She wore her hair pulled back, no longer hiding. "A year ago," she said clearly, "I hated my scar. I hated what it represented. I hated that people stared and whispered and made assumptions about me based on one part of my face. I wanted to disappear." She paused, finding her father in the crowd, then Ethan, then Sophie, and Emma. "But then my dad and I moved here, started over. And I learned that scars tell stories. Mine tells a story about surviving, about losing my mom but finding friends who understand, about learning that being different doesn't mean being less." She touched her scar deliberately, the gesture now habitual rather than self-conscious. "I learned it from Sophie's dad, actually. Mr. Brooks taught me that being seen, really seen for who you are beneath the surface, is the greatest gift anyone can give. He saw me when everyone else saw my damage, and that changed everything." Lena smiled, and it was genuine and full and beautiful. "So if you're here because you lost someone, because you're grieving and don't know how to carry it, I see you, we all see you, and you're not alone. You never have to be alone again." The applause was deafening. Sophie and Emma rushed the stage to hug Lena, all three girls crying and laughing simultaneously. Patricia was sobbing in the front row. Richard and Ethan stood together watching their daughters, carrying their own grief and their own gratitude. "We did okay?" Richard said quietly. "Yeah," Ethan agreed. "We really did." After the event, as families lingered and children played and volunteers cleaned up, Ethan found himself standing in front of the memorial wall. Miranda's photo was there, along with Claire's and Marcus's and dozens of others. Each one a person who'd been loved and lost. Each one leaving behind people struggling to figure out how to keep living. Sophie appeared at his elbow, slipping her hand into his. "Do you still miss Mommy?" "Every single day, baby." "Me too." Sophie leaned against him. "But I'm also happy. Is that okay? To be sad and happy at the same time?" "That's exactly okay. That's what it means to heal. You don't forget the sad parts, but you make room for happy parts too. Like how the scrapbook Emma made has pages about our moms dying, but also pages about our friendship and moving to Portland and the Princess Club. Exactly like that." Sophie was quiet for a moment, studying the memorial wall. "I think Mommy would like Lena and Emma and Mr. Richard and what we're doing here. I think she'd love it." Ethan pulled his daughter close. "I think she'd be proud of how brave you've been, how kind, how willing to open your heart even after it's been broken." "You taught me that, Daddy. You and Mr. Richard showed us that being broken doesn't mean staying broken, that you can take the pieces and build something new." Out of the mouths of babes, teaching the teachers, reminding the adults what actually mattered. That night, the extended family gathered one last time at Patricia's. It had become tradition, Saturday dinners where they shared meals and stories and the comfortable chaos of people who'd chosen each other. "I have an announcement," Richard said during dessert. "I've decided to sell my majority stake in Harrington Industries. I'm keeping enough to stay on the board and maintain influence, but I'm stepping away from running the company." The table went silent. "Why?" Patricia asked. "Because I've realized something over this past year. I built that company to prove I could, to honor Marcus's memory by being successful. But success isn't what matters. Impact is what matters. And I can make more impact working full-time on community programs than I can running a corporation." He looked at Ethan. "So I'm proposing we make this official. The grief counseling program, the community partnerships, all of it. Let's turn it into a real nonprofit, the Marcus Harrington Foundation, dedicated to helping families navigate loss and build community from grief." "Richard, I don't know what to say." "Say yes. Be my co-director. Help me build something that actually changes lives instead of just making money." Richard's eyes shone. "Marcus wanted to help veterans. We can't do that for him, but we can help people who are struggling. We can create the support network we wish we'd had. We can prove that loss doesn't have to be the end of the story." Ethan thought about the challenge coin in his pocket, worn smooth from a year of constant handling, about the brother Richard had lost and the wife Ethan had buried and all the invisible threads connecting their pain to purpose. "On one condition," he said finally. "Name it." "We include a veteran support program, part of the foundation's mission, because Marcus deserves that too." Richard's smile broke like dawn. Deal! They shook hands across the table while their daughters cheered and Patricia cried happy tears, and the future spread out before them, uncertain but promising. 2 years after that first dance at the gala, Ethan stood in the ballroom of the Grandview Hotel, the same room where everything had started. But tonight was different. Tonight, the Grandview was hosting the Marcus Harrington Foundation's annual fundraiser. The ballroom was filled with families who'd been helped by their programs, donors who believed in their mission, and community members who'd seen firsthand what connection and compassion could accomplish. The memorial gallery from the community center had been recreated here, now containing hundreds of pieces. The grief counseling program served over 300 families across the Pacific Northwest. They'd expanded to include veterans support, finding that the principles that helped grieving children helped struggling soldiers too. Richard stood at the podium, giving the keynote address. Lena sat in the front row with Sophie and Emma, all three girls in formal dresses, confident and happy and whole. 2 years ago, Richard was saying, a waiter at this hotel made a choice that changed my life. He saw my daughter sitting alone, isolated by her grief and her scars, and he chose to treat her with dignity. One dance, 5 minutes, and everything changed. He found Ethan in the crowd. That waiter, Ethan Brooks, is now my business partner, my co-director, and most importantly, my best friend. He taught me that the most valuable currency isn't money, it's compassion. It's the willingness to see someone's pain and choose to help anyway. The audience applauded. Ethan felt his face heat, uncomfortable with the attention, but grateful for the recognition. So tonight, Richard continued, we're honoring everyone who's made that same choice, who's seen someone struggling and reached out, who's chosen kindness over comfort, who's proved that one moment of courage can ripple outward and change lives. He paused, emotion evident. We can't bring back the people we've lost. We can't erase the scars or undo the grief. But we can choose how we carry it forward. We can build communities that support each other. We can create spaces where grief is acknowledged and hope is possible. We can prove that love doesn't end when life does. It just changes shape. The ballroom erupted in applause. People stood, clapping until their hands hurt, moved by the message and the man delivering it. After the formal program ended, Ethan found himself on the same spot where he'd asked Lena to dance 2 years ago. The memory was vivid, the fear, the choice. The moment everything shifted. Penny, for your thoughts? Patricia appeared beside him with 2 glasses of champagne. Just remembering. Good memories or hard ones? Both. Ethan accepted the glass. Sometimes I think about how close I came to not asking her to dance, to just doing my job and going home and never knowing what I'd missed. But you didn't. You chose courage, and look what it built. Patricia gestured at the ballroom full of people connected by shared loss and stubborn hope. This exists because you saw a lonely little girl and chose to help. Richard would have found another way. Maybe, but this way led here, to this moment, to these friendships, to a foundation that's helping hundreds of families. Patricia squeezed his arm. Don't diminish what you did. Own it. Celebrate it. She drifted away to join another conversation, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts and his champagne. Daddy? Sophie appeared, Lena and Emma trailing behind. Can we ask you something? Of course. The girls exchanged glances, clearly having rehearsed this. Lena spoke first. We've been talking about how your dance with me started everything, about how one choice can change the world. And we want to do that too, Emma continued. We want to make choices that matter, that help people. Sophie finished the thought. So we started a club at school, the Kindness Club, where we look for kids who are sitting alone or being left out, and we invite them to sit with us. We're teaching other kids to see people the way you saw Lena. Ethan's throat tightened. That's beautiful, girls. We're also raising money, Lena added. We're doing a bake sale and donating everything to the foundation, so we can help even more families. How much have you raised? The girls beamed. $243. Mrs. Chen said that's really good for second graders. Ethan knelt to their level, pulling all 3 into a hug. You know what? I'm prouder of you 3 than I've ever been of anything. You're taking what you learned and passing it forward. That's exactly what matters. We learned it from you, Sophie said. You taught us that being brave means helping people even when you're scared. And you taught us that scars don't define us, Lena added, that who we are inside matters more than what shows on the outside. And you taught us that families are built from love, not just blood, Emma finished, that we get to choose who we belong to. Out of the mouths of babes, speaking truth that adults spent years learning to articulate. As the evening wound down and families started leaving, Ethan found Richard on the balcony overlooking the city. Portland spread out below them, lights twinkling in the darkness, full of lives being lived and stories being written. Hell of a night, Richard said. Hell of a 2 years. You know what's crazy? I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for something to go wrong, for this all to fall apart. Richard shook his head. I'm not used to things actually working out. Maybe that's what we learned, that sometimes things do work out, not perfectly, not without scars, but enough. Good enough to keep building on. They stood in comfortable silence, two men who'd found friendship in the wreckage of loss, who'd built something meaningful from shared grief. Marcus would have liked you, Richard said eventually, would have appreciated your straight talk and your stubborn independence. Claire would have loved watching our daughters become friends. Miranda would have thought you were too uptight at first, Ethan admitted with a smile. But she would have seen past that to who you really are. Would have been glad Sophie had Lena in her life. To the people we lost, Richard raised his glass. And to the people we found, Ethan added. They clinked glasses as the city lights blurred and steadied, as the past and present wove together into something that looked suspiciously like peace. The next morning, Ethan woke to find Sophie already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her journal open. Writing about last night, he asked, starting the coffee maker. Writing about everything. Sophie showed him the page, filled with her careful handwriting and small drawings. All the good things that happened because you danced with Lena, our move to Portland, the foundation, the kindness club, all of it. That's a lot of good things. I know. Sophie's expression turned serious. I was thinking about what you always say, about how Mommy's death was terrible, but we get to choose what we do with it, about building something from the broken pieces. Yeah, baby, that's exactly right. Well, I think we did it. We built something really good. Sophie closed her journal carefully. Mommy would be proud, don't you think? Ethan looked at his daughter, 8 years old now, wise beyond her years, carrying grief and hope in equal measure. She'd lost her mother too young, had every right to be bitter or broken. Instead, she'd chosen kindness, had learned to see people's pain and try to help, had become the kind of person who started kindness clubs and raised money for grieving families, and loved fiercely despite knowing love could end in loss. Yeah, baby, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Mommy would be so proud. I'm proud too, so incredibly proud. Sophie smiled and went back to her journal, documenting their story for some future self who might need reminding that good things could grow from grief, that courage could look like asking someone to dance, that one choice could ripple outward and change everything. Outside, morning broke over Portland. 3 houses down, Lena was probably waking up to a similar day. Next door, Emma was likely already awake, full of energy and plans. Around the city, hundreds of families were starting their Saturdays, some struggling with fresh grief, others finding their footing in healing, all of them connected by invisible threads of shared experience and stubborn hope. And somewhere in the space between memory and moment, Miranda and Claire and Marcus smiled at what had been built in their absence. Not replacement, never that, but continuation. The proof that love didn't end when life did. It just changed shape, rippled forward, became the foundation for something new. One dance had stopped the room. But what came after? The friendship, the foundation, the families finding each other in shared grief. That was the real story. That was what truly mattered. Ethan poured his coffee and sat down beside his daughter, ready to face whatever came next, knowing he wouldn't face it alone. Knowing that courage compounded, that kindness multiplied, that the choice to truly see someone could change the world. One dance at a time. One choice at a time. One moment of compassion rippling outward into an ocean of connection. That was the legacy. That was the lesson. That was what survived when everything else faded. Love transformed into action, grief alchemized into purpose. Scars acknowledged as stories of survival rather than shame. And three girls laughing in a backyard somewhere, planning their next act of rebellion disguised as kindness, proving that the next generation had learned what the previous one struggled to remember. That we're all just people, trying our best, deserving to be seen and loved and treated with dignity. That sometimes the greatest act of heroism is simply choosing to care when it would be easier not to. That one dance, one moment, one choice could echo forward through years and lives and remind everyone watching what it meant to be human. This was the story. This was how it ended. Not with tragedy erased, but with meaning found within it. Not with pain eliminated, but with purpose built from it. Not with forgetting, but with remembering what mattered most. Connection, compassion, courage, community. The things that couldn't be purchased or manufactured or faked. The things that had to be chosen, again and again, in moments large and small. Ethan raised his coffee mug and a silent toast to Miranda, to Marcus, to Claire, to everyone who'd been lost but not forgotten, to the families finding their way through grief, to the daughters teaching their fathers about bravery, to the friendships forged in fire and tested by time, to the truth that love survived everything, even death, even loss, even the deepest grief. It just changed shape, became something new, something beautiful, something worth dancing for.